Chapter 1153. P.S. I have something to do these 2 days, so I can only write one chapter first. I will find a way to make up for the missing chapters. In the middle of Mount Fenglai in the Donghua continent, under the Qing River, there was an aperture that had been silent for tens of thousands of years. But today, 2 lights suddenly appeared. It was Zhang Yan and Qi Yuntian who came together. This time, both of them came with a shadow doppelganger, so they did not alarm their peers. Zhang Yan stood in mid-air and looked at a huge pillar in front of him that could be hugged by 10 people. He said, "Is this the delimitation needle?" Qi Yuntian said, "It is this needle." Since ancient times, when someone dug the roots of the earth, in order to prevent people from doing the same thing again, Donghua and the other continents all have this pillar as a warning. Although Zhang Yan had heard of this needle for a long time and had seen it in the ancient books several times, he had never really come here to see it before. First, it was not easy to come here. Second, in order to prevent people from spying on it, there was a restrictive formation around it. Only the people of Dongtian could come in. At this moment, he looked at it carefully. Although this big pillar looked huge, what he saw was only a layer of mud outside, so it was not important. The most important thing was that the innermost part of it was a thin qi needle. This needle was refined by the cultivators of the western continent in ancient times using the moving li qi. This qi was extremely sensitive. Once the body of the needle was exposed to the outside world, or if the qi of the earth was abnormal, it would send a warning to all the major sections. Qi Yuntian said, "I have given the 2-9 restoration Qian pillars to the 2 people of the Dongxing continent and told them to refine it carefully. It will be completed in about 17 or 18 years. At that time, it will not be difficult to break through the barrier of Hunyuan and put it deep underground. But before that, we need to avoid this thing in case other sects notice." After the cultivators of the West continent and the cultivators from beyond the heavens worked together to conquer the Dongxing continent, in order to avoid repeating the same mistake, they wanted to set a rule when they made the agreement. No one was allowed to refine treasures like the 9 restoration Qian pillars that could break through the barrier of Hunyuan. But at that time, there were still cultivators from beyond the heavens going back and forth in this world, so the agreement had no power to restrict them. Moreover, there were always some talented rogue cultivators in the world. They had never signed a contract, so they didn't have to worry about it. In view of this, the cultivators finally discussed and set up a warning signal above the Hunyuan earthly barrier, and erected a fixed needle above each continent. As long as someone rashly touched the earthly qi, it would immediately be noticed by the sects that had established the agreement. However, this was an arrangement made 10,000 years ago. Nowadays, there were many ways to fool the fixing needle. Qi Yuntian turned his head and said, "For 10,000 years. There were only 5 grotto heaven cultivators who came here, and all of them came here to increase their knowledge. None of them were worried about the boundary needle, because they knew that anyone who dared to do anything to this place was equivalent to going against all the cultivators in the world." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "It hasn't happened in 10,000 years, but it doesn't mean that it won't happen in 10,000 years. Now, everyone in the world knows that the tribulation is near. There's no way they wouldn't come to investigate. Perhaps there's more than 1 or 2 of them." Qi Yuntian nodded and said, "That's right, Qinsang School is going to make a move. Not only do we need to hide the boundary needle, we also need to find a way to fool the cultivators of the various sections." Luckily, Sect Master Jinren had already foreseen this and prepared this item. As he said this, he took out a ball of ethereal qi and held it in his palm. "I hope that junior brother can protect me." Zhang Yan bowed and said, "Senior brother, please do your best." Qi Yuntian walked forward and sent the ball of qi dynamic forward, allowing it to enter the mud pillar. Then, he sat cross-legged. There was a spiritual light on his finger, as though he was slowly manipulating the spiritual opportunity. This ball of qi was refined in the spiritual eye of Qinsang School, and it could be used to set up an invisible barrier outside the qi needle. Once there was a change in the ground, the qi would first pass through this barrier, and then it would be transferred to the qi needle. But with this item, the process would be extended to tens or hundreds of years. The violent change that happened in one night would be delayed for such a long time, and the boundary needle would subtly think that it was a natural change in the chi of the earth, and would not easily trigger the alarm. In this way, unless it was someone like Master Lingya who personally came to check, there would not be any flaws in the next 100 years. And this kind of respected elder would not easily leave the sect, so there was no need to worry for this period of time. Now, the only thing that he needed to be wary of was the current situation. If any of the sects that signed the contract had a sudden impulse and sent someone over to check, there was a high chance that the person would notice something was wrong here. After Qi Yuntian made his move, Zhang Yan also sat down, but his spirit was constantly on the outside. Once the ball of qi was sent out, it could not be retrieved back, and if someone barged in at this time, it might spoil the whole thing. After 3 days of smooth sailing, he suddenly felt something in his heart. A wisp of spiritual vigor flashed across the sky. He immediately recognized that it was a shadow of a Taoist heavenly abode, and he was familiar with that qi dynamic. It's Qiao Zhengdao from Yuanyang sect. What is he doing here? However, the qi only paused for a moment before passing by. However, it did not go far. It only paced back and forth above. Sometimes it would stop near, and sometimes it would stop far away. It was completely unpredictable, as if it was looking for something. Zhang Yan thought, with the impending doom, Yuanyang sect should also be preparing the method to pass the tribulation. Qiao Zhengdao's clone might be here because of the rumor, but I didn't expect that this sect would not give up until now. Mount Fenglai used to be the headquarters of Honghe Monastery, a large sect in Donghua's middle continent. For some reason, several Taoist abode masters of this sect fought with each other, causing their headquarters to decline. Later on, it was replaced by Yuanyang. At that time, the Yuanyang sect was already showing signs of prosperity, so they seized the opportunity to take over the spirit cave. But the disciples of the Honghe Monastery were also stubborn. They knew that they couldn't do anything to the Yuanyang sect, so they pushed down the mountain gate of their own accord, sealed the formation, and destroyed all the precious medicines and spirit pills, so that the Yuanyang sect didn't get any benefits from them. According to the rumors, before the cultivators of the Honghe temple went to fight in the outer space, they had hidden all their treasures in a small world, including the Zhikong map. However, no one had been able to find it ever since. However, Yuanyang sect had never given up on searching for it during the past thousands of years. It was one thing for him to search for treasures, but if he discovered any abnormalities below, it might ruin his plans. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed. Since he came here, he had prepared in advance. If the other party didn't come down to check, then there was no need for him to do anything. But if things didn't go as he wished, he had a way to lure him away. But if he did so, there would always be a loophole, so he didn't do anything. After Qiao Zhengdao's doppelganger wandered in the sky for a day, it seemed to have no interest in the delimitation needle. Or maybe it had already been here before, so it didn't land to check. Finally, it returned to the direction of the mountain gate. Since it was related to the sect's plan, Zhang Yan didn't let his guard down. His eyes followed it until it landed on Mingbai Mountain. Another day later, Qi Yuntian had sent out all the profound qi in his palm. However, this shadow doppelganger had consumed too much Fa Li and was on the verge of collapse. He had already expected this, so he said, "I'll have to trouble junior brother to take care of the aftermath later." Zhang Yan said, "Don't worry, senior brother." Qi Yuntian said again, "It's a pity that I can't go to the North Dark Star continent to do this. Otherwise, I wouldn't have to put in so much effort." In reality, the 4 continents were one. If they moved the routes, they could do it in any continent, except for the South Cliff continent. Originally, the North Dark Star continent and the Middle Pillar continent could both be used as places to collect qi. But the Qinsang school didn't forget that Yu Xiao had used all kinds of methods to make these 3 continents fall into Yuya's hands. Because they suspected that Yu Xiao had secretly set up some tricks, they were afraid that once they moved, it would immediately be sensed by Master Lingya. Even if it wasn't so, they couldn't take this risk. So, the most appropriate place to do it was the Donghua continent. Zhang Yan said, "Yu Xiao school isn't easy to deal with. If it wasn't for the constraints of various parties, causing them to be unable to set up Yuya in the Donghua continent, I'm afraid it would be a different story today. Qi Yuntian nodded and said, this person, Lingya, has not appeared for thousands of years. He must be secretly setting up something. But as for what exactly he is doing, no one knows. The preparations that we, the Qinsong, have made for hundreds of years, may not be able to defend against it. Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, if we can see through everything beforehand, then there won't be any disasters. For me, it's a disaster, but for Yu Xiao, it's also a disaster. Qi Yuntian laughed and nodded in agreement. After a few more words, Qi Yuntian's doppelganger slowly dissipated. Zhang Yan reached out and pressed down, erasing all the qi that was left behind. Then, with a shake of his body, he disappeared. At the same time, in the Xuanzi Sea realm, the seawater was tumbling, as if it was boiling. The sword qi that was originally hovering here turned from strong to weak, and from weak to strong again. There were already more than 100 of them, flying back and forth in the small world, causing all the aquatic creatures to hide, not daring to show their faces. Every time the sword qi turned back, it would take away a wisp of spiritual vigor. However, this place was in the third upper hall of the Qinsong school, above the spirit cave. Every time the spiritual vigor was lost, it would be continuously replenished from the outside. At this moment, the entire sea realm surrounding the side hall was filled with sharp rainbow lights. It seemed to have the momentum to destroy everything, and it was still rising. A black flood dragon that was hiding under the sea could not bear the pressure. With a howl, it leaped out of the water and desperately flew out. However, after a few miles, it collided with several sword qi. Its body trembled and fell from the sky. Although there was not a single wound on its body, it was already dead. After an unknown period of time, the sword lights suddenly converged and actually vanished in an instant. The surface of the sea remained calm for around 100 breaths of time before a clear sword howl resounded through the sky. At the same time, a myriad of sharp and fierce sword lights appeared once more, and they flew up into the sky in succession. After that, all of them shook in unison and collided towards the same spot. After a while, there was a loud thunderclap that could split a mountain. A ball of sword qi rose into the sky. It was like a bright crystal, sweeping through the clouds and spanning across the sky. As it flowed and rotated, the light appeared, and tens of thousands of rays of light shone brightly. After a long time, the sword qi retracted, revealing the figure of a Taoist. Ning Chongxian sat for a long time, his green robe fluttering in the wind. He held a magic sword in his hand, and after a while, he flicked his finger and chanted in the sword hum, the clouds stand above the dust, the green robe sweeps in all directions, the distant sword points to the south, the cold light of the thousand spirits building. Measuring the breadth of heaven and earth, the universe stands upright. Chapter 1154. After Ning Chongxian obtained the grotto heaven, he focused on comprehending the changes after entering this realm. Just as he was about to try out his divine sense, he suddenly felt something in his heart. He turned around and saw a talisman flying towards him. He picked it up and looked at it. He couldn't help but be moved. After pondering for a while, he put it into his sleeve. At this moment, a flying boat came from the sky and landed in front of him. Just now, it slowly stopped. Jing Yu stood on the boat and said, "Jinren Ning, the hall master invites you." Ning Chongxian kept his sword and stood up. He said, "I'll go now." As soon as he finished speaking, he turned into a rainbow and soared into the sky, piercing through the clouds and landing in front of the main hall of Duzhen Hall. Seeing his arrival, the 2 rows of tall Taoists half knelt on the ground and bowed respectfully. Ning Chongxian strode up the stairs and entered the hall. He saw Zhang Yan standing on the jade platform with a slight smile on his face. He stopped and greeted, "Right Hall Master Ning Chongxian greets Hall Master." Even though he'd entered the Dao earlier than Zhang Yan, he was a person who attached great importance to seniority and etiquette. At this moment, as a subordinate, the etiquette he carried out was extremely strict and not the slightest bit disrespectful. Zhang Yan returned the etiquette and said with a smile, "Right Hall Master, forming a grotto heaven is a blessing for the sect. Just now, Sect Master Perfected has sent me a letter saying that he needs you to do something. When it's convenient for you, you can meet him in the hall." Ning Chongxian said seriously, "Since it's Sect Master Perfected's instruction, there's no reason to delay. I'll go immediately." As he spoke, he bowed and turned into a light and flew away. Zhang Yan looked at the light that left and thought, Right Hall Master has also formed a grotto heaven. Including Perfected Mu, there are already 16 perfected grotto heavens in Qinsang School and many small realms in the sect. Usually, the consumption of spiritual opportunity is already at its limit. After the news spread, I think all the sects in the world will be wary of me. Without Sect Master Qin's grand plan, Qinsang School would only have two choices. Either it would remain stagnant and watch the spiritual opportunity of the spirit cave deplete. Alternatively, they could turn their heads and head out to seize more places of spiritual opportunity. However, no one really thought that Qinsang School would sit still and do nothing. From this moment on, the situation in the continent changed again. Several hours later, Ning Chongxian returned from the main hall and came to visit Zhang Yan. After the two greeted each other. After he sat down, Zhang Yan asked, "Does the sect leader have any instructions?" Ning Chongxian took a glance at Jingyu. Zhang Yan understood and said, "You may leave." Jingyu bowed and said, "Yes, master." After he left, Ning Chongxian looked over, raised his hand, and said, "My Duzhen Palace has a former palace master. Her name was He Jingchen. After this senior passed away, a body was left behind in the sect. I wonder if Hall Master knows about this." Hearing him mention this, Zhang Yan was slightly surprised, but he did not intend to hide it. He said, "I know about this, and I also know about the whereabouts of spiritual master He's body. Just now beside the earth-fire heavenly cauldron in Fangchen courtyard, the servant beside me was originally listening to spiritual master He. It was originally used by Jinren He, but I wonder why Right Hall Master brought this up." Ning Chongxian said, "When I broke into the grotto heaven, I felt a qi dynamic helping me from behind, but I didn't know who it was. After I succeeded, I received a letter, and it was signed by the former Hall Master Zhua Yuming, spiritual master Zhua. The book recorded his cultivation experience, and there were also notes on several supernatural powers. However, at the end of the book, it mentioned that if it was convenient for the future generations, they could try to bring back Hall Master He's body, and not let it be left outside." Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows and said, "So it was Hall Master Zhua's arrangement. Where is his letter?" Ning Chongxian took out the talisman book and said, "The letter is here." Zhang Yan took it and glanced at it. His eyes flashed slightly. When He Jingchen was the main hall master, Zhua Yuming just happened to be the left hall master. Although the two of them belonged to the same branch of the Truth Purification Hall, Daoist Zhua stood on the sect master's side when he came into conflict with Qin Qinggang. However, He Jingchen didn't make things difficult for him after that, and it was very likely because of this that she left this letter. Zhang Yan thought for a while and said, "Right Hall Master, did Sect Master Zhua tell you about the sect's grand plan?" Ning Chongxian nodded solemnly and said, "I have been informed by Sect Master Zhua." Zhang Yan said, "Right Hall Master should know that the matter with Spiritual Master He was because he had a disagreement with the previous Sect Master. According to Spiritual Master He's plan, only a few people from our Qinsang School could go to the Heavenly Cauldron, and the rest could be abandoned. Even if I was there, I would not take such an idea." Later on, no one cared about his body, and this was also the reason. Right now, my grand plan has not been launched. If I take back his body at this time, it will easily cause misunderstandings, and this is not appropriate. Ning Chongxian said, "Yes, I also know that this is not appropriate. However, since I have received Spiritual Master Zhua's legacy, I have to ask on his behalf to repay the ancestors' wish." Zhang Yan thought for a while and asked, "Does Sect Master know about this?" Ning Chongxian shook his head and said, "After all, this is our Duzhen Hall's matter. Without Hall Master's approval, I will not rashly report it to Sect Master." Zhang Yan thought for a while and said, After all, this person is our Duzhen Hall's former hall master, and he also has the will of the previous hall master. Before this, I did not ask about it, but now it is not good to ignore it. Thinking of this, he said, once the Great Tribulation begins, the earthly fire heavenly cauldron may not be stable. If it is destroyed, it will be disrespectful to the ancestors. How about this? I will order someone to bring it to another place. However, if it wants to be worshipped with the body of the previous hall master, it will have to wait until after the Great Tribulation. Ning Chongxian thought for a while and said, Hall master's decision is appropriate, your highness is willing to follow this suggestion. Zhang Yan nodded and said with a smile, since right hall master has formed a cave, you can be promoted to the left hall. As for the right hall, it can be settled by the capable disciples in the future. Ning Chongxian bowed and said solemnly, at your highness' command. After the two talked for a while, Ning Chongxian was about to leave. However, before he left, he suddenly said, Hall master, what does that world look like? Zhang Yan thought for a while and said, since that world is just now opened, there may be a lot of great demons. Ning Chongxian asked, why great demons and not limitless glory? Zhang Yan smiled and said, it's always good to be prepared for danger first and safe after. Moreover, as soon as we step onto the path of the Tao, we'll be fighting with the heavens, the earth, and the people. If we only hope for good results and aren't willing to discern the dangers, then we'll have already lost the will to improve. Does Left Hall Master think so? Ning Chongxian stood up and said, that is the truth. Even if there are demons, we will just kill them with a sword. With that, he cupped his hands and bowed, then bid farewell and left. Zhang Yan sat for a while and then called Jing Yu over. He handed a talisman to him and said, go to Fangchen courtyard later and send Jinren his body to this small world. Just don't alarm others. Jing Yu was He Jingchen's follower in the past, so he was very clear about this Jinren's disagreement with the former headmaster. Of course, the main reason was that He Jingchen abandoned the group and left alone. After this matter was spread out, it caused displeasure in the sect. At that time, He Jingchen was pushed aside and eventually died of depression. Therefore, after receiving the talisman, he bowed and said, don't worry, master. I know how dangerous this place is and will handle it properly. Zhang Yan nodded and said, I am assured that you will handle it. Go. Jing Yu bowed and left. Zhang Yan thought to himself and said, Jinren Zhuo left this letter because he thought that Headmaster Qin would follow the path that Jinren He left behind. This action may be to hide Jinren He's body, but it may also be to remind Headmaster Qin not to repeat the mistakes of the past. However, this person probably did not expect that Headmaster Qin's mind is not limited to one sect or one family. With this step, either the world will be turned upside down and all the Jinren will return to silence, or the sky will be changed and the sun will be replaced. His gaze shot towards the letter, and he said indifferently, since I've already gone beyond the heavens, why worry about the matters of the later generations? As soon as he finished speaking, he flicked his finger, and the letter instantly transformed into a ball of fluttering fragments. In the end, it transformed into ash that dispersed with the wind. Winter came and went, the sun and moon alternated, and 10 years passed in a flash. In the upper extreme hall, Qi Yuntian was sitting. A disciple came and bowed at the bottom of the stairs and said softly, Hall Master, the two people in the small world sent a letter today. Qi Yuntian raised his hand and took the letter. The two people in the small world referred to Gan and Ji. He opened the letter and was slightly surprised. In the letter, it said that the two people have already refined the 9 Restoration Qian Determination Pillar, so they wrote to ask what the next step should be. Qi Yuntian originally thought that it would take them at least 17 to 18 years to refine this precious pillar, but now it seemed that the two people were very sensible. He wrote a letter on the spot and instructed the disciple, send this letter to the right hall master of the Duzhen Hall. The disciple received the letter and left with the order. An hour later, an array door suddenly opened in the small world where Gan Shouting and Ji Xiangping were. Then, a green-robed Taoist stepped out of it. After the two sent the letter, they were waiting for a reply. Now that they saw a Taoist cave master that they had never seen before, they came out to greet him and asked, "May I know which Taoist master is here?" The Taoist in green said, "The right hall master of the Duzhen Hall, Ning Chongxian, is here under the order of the sect to protect the two of you." "Protect?" Gan Shouting was shocked and asked tentatively, "Your sect wants the two of us to take action now?" Ning Chongxian glanced at the two of them and said, "Since the two of you have already refined the treasured pillars, why do you still need to wait?" Ji Xiangping was shocked and said, "Even if we have already refined this thing, what should we do with the earth qi that we have absorbed? There is nothing here to store it." Ning Chongxian said indifferently, "The sect sent me here to deal with this matter. The two of you just need to control the precious pillar, there is no need to ask anything else." His Yuxiao Thousand Snatching Sword scripture was extremely difficult to learn, but after he cultivated it to the grotto heaven, his power in fights of magical powers was not small, especially when it was used to snatch spiritual opportunity from the outside world. Originally, the earth qi needed to be moved with the help of magic weapons, but now that he was here, it was convenient to move. Ji Xiangping and Gan Shouting looked at each other and said in unison, "In that case, we will start now." Chapter 1155. Ning Chongxian took out a talisman and threw it out. After the talisman flew out, it landed on the ground and turned into an array door about 10 feet in size. Soft rays of light shone from the door and shone on everyone. He leaned to the side and raised his hand, saying, "My two friends, please." This was a small world, and activating the 9 return Qian pillar had to be done on the surface of Donghua continent. However, it was not convenient to do it here. Gan and Ji understood that since they had already signed the contract, they were already in the same boat as Qinsang School. If Qinsang School's plan succeeded, they might get a good result. If it failed, the outcome would be worrying. Since that was the case, they might as well put in more effort. Therefore, they did not resist at all. They bowed and walked toward the array door. The two only felt a flash of light before them. They had arrived in a ravine with high cliffs on both sides. They climbed into the clouds, and only a sliver of the sky could be seen. Below their feet was a flight of stairs made of jade bricks. The gap between the cliffs on both sides was so narrow that only one person could pass through at a time. Ever since they came to the Donghua continent, the two of them had been trapped in the small world of the Yutsang sect. Now that they were in the outside world, their emotions were extremely complicated. They tried to use their mana, but they felt their bodies sink. They knew that they were suppressed by a prohibition and could not use the flying technique. They could only obediently walk down the passage. After walking for a few miles, they walked into a spacious crypt. The place was oblong in shape, and the top was covered by a light. Only the light was like stars, flickering slightly. It seemed like the void was endless, and they could faintly feel that it was connected to another array world. There were 81 ancient and heavy tablets around them. It was obvious that there were countless restriction runes carved on them, and they exuded an aura that even the two of them were afraid of. In the middle, there was a square well that was about a mile long and wide. Waves of air floated out from it, and 4 boys each occupied a corner. Each of them guarded a bronze crane with its beak facing down. Drops of silver-white liquid dripped down into a stone pot below, and there was a dripping sound. Ning Chongxian walked in and said, "This well is called the Netherworld Well. My Qinsang School has been digging for hundreds of years and has already connected it to the ground. It will save the two of you a lot of time." The 9 Serendipity Qian pillar was refined using the magnetic true sand. It only required a bit of magic power to be activated, and it would be attracted by the magnetic force under the Hunyuan earthly barrier. Therefore, the previous action did not require much effort from the two of them. But the difficult part was that after breaking through the Hunyuan earthly barrier, he needed to reverse the magnetic pole. Only by lifting up the jade pillar could the qi be extracted. Not only did this consume a lot of magic power, but when the distance was too far, no cultivator could do anything. The ancient cultivator's solution to this problem was to refine a qi rope to complement it. However, the materials needed to refine this rope could no longer be found, so they could only be replaced with other items. It could also be dissolved by the true power of magnetism, so he had no choice but to use a trick this time. Gon and Ji followed the instructions of the Qinsang school. They would refine their own blood essence into the pillar. This way, the pillar would be like a clone of them. When they activated the pillar, they would be able to attach their own spirit to it and dive into the depths of the abyss to extract the qi of the earth. It would not be that difficult to retreat. There were pros and cons to this. It was good to be able to advance and retreat at will, but there were few cultivators from the Xianmen underground. No one could say what would happen if they were not careful. Not only would they not be able to retrieve the 7 serendipity pillar, their spirit might also be implicated and be heavily injured. Under such circumstances, the closer they were to the earthly barrier, the better it was. Ning Chongxian said, "I will receive the 2 of you from above. If the 2 of you lose any jade pillars, please inform me as soon as possible. The sect can also respond as soon as possible." This was the reason why sect leader Qin had refined many 9 return pillars in the past hundreds of years. It would take at least a few decades to extract qi of the earth. During this time, it was hard to guarantee that there would not be any damage. With a certain amount, this plan would not be interrupted. Gon and Ji bowed and said, "Don't worry, Master. We will definitely do our best." In order to refine this pillar, they knew that they had paid a great price. If they were to accidentally break it, they would still be the ones to suffer in the end. They had long since made up their minds to think of a way to protect this jade pillar. Ning Chongxian knew that for today, the sect had specially invited Zhou Chengju, the head of the Danding courtyard, to refine many elixirs. Even if the 2 of them lost their vitality, they could recover in a short period of time. However, to prevent the 2 of them from slacking off, he did not want to say it out loud. At this moment, seeing that the 2 of them seemed to want to say something, he asked, "Is there anything else?" Gon shouting cupped his hands and said, "This is what I am thinking. Can your sect send a few servants to listen to me? It would be best if they are strong men. If we can't move the jade pillars, we can ask them to help." Ning Chongxian thought for a while and said, "This is a reasonable suggestion. If the 2 of you have any other needs, you can mention it at the same time. Otherwise, when things come to a head, there will be more complications." It was not that the Qinsang school had not thought of this beforehand. It was because the 2 of them were not from the same sect after all. Of course, they could not put themselves in their shoes. However, now that they had brought it up, they naturally would not reject it. The 2 of them hurriedly said, we dare not, we dare not. Apart from this, there is nothing else." Ning Chongxian said, "Then please wait for a moment." He used his finger as a pen and used his mana to condense a talisman book. With a gentle wave of his sleeve, he sent it out. After waiting for a long time, 2 mighty and majestic men came from the outside. They were more than 30 feet tall. They were the masked men from the 3rd High Hall who were in charge of moving the islands and the peaks. However, what they saw now was not their original size. To make it convenient to come here, they purposely made their bodies smaller. At this moment, the 2 of them knelt down and said, "He Gong, He Shou, we are here on the Mountain Gate's orders. We will listen to the 3 Jinren's orders." Gon shouting did not know where the 2 of them came from. After asking a few questions, he found out about their abilities. He could not help but be overjoyed and said, "With such helpers, we will definitely get twice the result with half the effort." Ning Chongxian said, "Then there is no need to delay. Follow me." He raised his hand and waved. A cloud of qi flew over from the monument and wrapped around the 3 of them and the 2 masked men. Then, it was thrown into the netherworld well. Gon and Ji felt that they had passed through another formation door. When their feet touched the ground, they realized that they had landed in a cave hall built with solid stones. Ning Chongxian said, "This is the end of the Mountain Gate's forbidden formation. If we go further down, we will need to fly on our own." The 2 of them nodded to show that they understood. Ning Chongxian did not say anything else. He took the lead and the 2 of them flew down with the masked men. After an hour, They arrived in a cave hall similar to the one before. They finally stopped. Ning Chongxian waved his sleeves and swept away some of the black and filthy qi in the surroundings. He said, I can only send you up to this point. You will need to rely on yourselves for the rest. Gan shouting bowed and said, we have signed the contract. We will definitely not let you down. The two of them first gave the two Taoists a few words of advice. Then, they took out the 9 revival pillar and placed it in front of them before sitting down. Not long after, they released a strand of their spirit and attached it to the jade pillar. The item swayed and suddenly flew up, descending deeper into the abyss. The two masked men did not need to look after each other. They each took out a talisman and stuffed it into their mouths. He stuffed it into his mouth and jumped down as well. The jade pillar traveled all the way down, and due to being pulled by the magnetic force, its speed became faster and faster. However, their souls were hidden within the treasured pillar, so they were unable to estimate the exact time in the outside world. They only felt that the journey was rather long. After an unknown period of time, he felt the pillar tremble. As if they had collided with something, both of their divine souls trembled. They knew that if there were no accidents, the jade pillar should have smashed through the Hunyuan earth barrier. It was not far from where the earth root was. After the two of them went down, Ning Chongxian sat cross-legged above. There was no spiritual opportunity here, only some filthy qi. It was also too filthy and contaminated with some magnetic force, so it could not be used for cultivation. It was only for daily cultivation, so he could only use elixir jade as a replacement. Once he was immersed, a month had passed unknowingly. On this day, suddenly, he heard a rumbling sound below. He immediately woke up and looked down. The sound was getting closer. After 100 breaths, he saw 2 white shadows rushing up in front of him, as if they were going to a higher place. His reaction was fast. He reached out and grabbed them with mana. He said, Jinren, you can let go now. The two of them restrained the jade pillar and hurriedly returned their spirits back into their bodies. However, the light in their eyes was dim, as if they had lost too much of their spirit qi. Gan shouting cupped his hands and said, Thank you for your help, Jinren. I didn't expect the repulsive force to be so strong after the magnetic force reversed. We almost couldn't control it. Ning Chongxian reached into his sleeves and threw 2 elixir bottles. He said, This is the vitality elixir. Take it quickly. The two of them thanked him. After taking it, they identified the elixir and were delighted. They quickly kept it into their bodies and sat down to meditate. At this time, Ning Chongxian operated his mana, and rays of brilliance immediately leaped out from his body, collecting all the qi of earth contained in the jade pillar. Then, it gathered in his hand and turned into a sword gleam. He sent it upwards and turned into a ray of light to escape, quickly disappearing. After the sword of qi flew out of the abyss, almost at the same time, all the Jinren of Dongtian in Qinsang school sensed it and looked over silently. In the hall of Duzhen, Zhang Yan opened his eyes and looked over. Once the earth qi was collected, it meant that the plan that had been planned for hundreds of years had really started. It wouldn't be long before a battle of life and death that would decide the future of the sect would come. The battle is coming. I need to cultivate the Qiankuan leaf as soon as possible. I only hope I can make it in time. Over the past 10 years, the signs of the treasure's true consciousness transformation were getting more and more obvious. He believed that it was not far from his expectation. However, it was hard to say whether he could succeed before the disaster. Just as he was about to meditate again, he suddenly felt something. He sensed that there was a spirit qi in the realm that was about to move. It was extremely lively, like the flowing water of the Yangtze River, but also like the rushing tide. It contained a vigorous vitality. He turned around and saw that the direction was coming from the place where his eldest disciple, Lu Yenny, was cultivating. With his cultivation, he naturally knew what it meant. His eldest disciple had been cultivating in the realm for many years and had gradually seen the doorway to that step. Unfortunately, judging from the current situation, she might only be able to leave the disaster for a few decades. she might be able to make it in time for the battle. He thought, once the tribulation of human begins, no one dares to say that they can definitely pass it. It might be a blessing not to participate in this battle. Chapter 1156. Chinsung School, Floating Heavenly Palace. On the platform in front of the hall, a rainbow light suddenly swirled and a clear chi scattered. After floating for a long time, two figures appeared. Sect leader Qin stood up from his seat and bowed, saying, "The two sect leaders have arrived." They were Pingdu sect's sect leader Qi Hongchan and Huanjin Temple's sect leader Pu Xiansheng. The two of them returned the greeting and said, "Greetings, sect leader Qin." As a sect leader, it was naturally impossible for them to leave the sect easily. They came here with a shadow clone. Sect leader Qin invited the two of them to sit down and said, "Please wait for a moment. There's still a guest who hasn't arrived." Qi and Pu, the two heads nodded. After waiting for about a moment, on the other side of the platform, a spiritual light flew out of thin air. Then, a surge of spiritual vigor rushed up. Although it was only a ray of light, the two sect leaders felt their hearts palpitate. They could clearly sense that there were countless brilliant sword lights gathered and flew in this pearl-like light. It seemed like once it spread out, it had the power to split heaven and earth. As this light slowly spread out, a figure gradually walked out. In the end, a handsome Taoist in his 30s walked out. He raised his hands and bowed, saying, "Sect leader Qin, I'm here as promised." Sect leader Qin stood up and bowed solemnly, saying, "Greetings, sect leader Yu." As expected, it's Shaoqing sect's sect leader Yu. Qi Hongchan and Pu Xuansheng's spirits were lifted. Although sect leader Qin had previously revealed that Chinsung School had an alliance with Shaoqing, the two of them weren't sure if it was just words of comfort. They couldn't be blamed for thinking too much. After all, in the past, this sect had only agreed verbally. It was more likely that they would act on their own in the end. However, seeing that Shaoqing sect's sect leader Yu Xianshao had also arrived, they finally made up their minds. If the Shaoqing and Yucang sects worked together, so what if they became enemies with the entire world? After the four of them greeted each other, they sat down. Sect leader Qin said, "My Chinsung school has already dug through the Hunyuan earth barrier 2 days ago. We have already obtained the earth qi." As he spoke, he waved his horsetail whisk and a thick aura floated up. Then, one of it floated into the sky while the other slowly sank. They were clearly separated and didn't disturb each other. Yu Xianshao could naturally tell that it was the earth qi that had just been extracted. The Yucang sect was extremely decisive this time. They acted as soon as they said they would. He took a step forward and made the world his enemy without any hesitation. This was exactly what he wanted. After all, this was something that they had already agreed upon. They were already prepared for this day. After all, this was something that had been decided a long time ago. They had been mentally prepared for this day to come. However, the flow of earth energy was slow and orderly. The chaotic essence earthly barrier was like a thin membrane, breathing in and out. Between the opening and closing, the acupoints were opened and closed, and spiritual vigor was released. However, if it was forcefully broken by an external force, it would be different. Mountain of Mountain. Sect Qi Time Zone Qi Yang Clan Sect, and Qi Yang Sect Mountain of the Q Zone Wood Qi. The once, Q Zone, the Earth, Yang Sect Master Qi, One, Qi, and Dao. Qi. There was even a possibility that it would affect the movement of the earth veins. That was something that could not be concealed. Therefore, they all understood that in at most 100 years, the Taoist grotto heavens of the various sects would sense the tremors of the earth's secrets. It was the day of the battle. At this moment, sect leader Qin looked at the three of them and said slowly, "Sect leaders, in the face of the great calamity, the most important thing is to distinguish between friend and foe." Although his gaze was clear, one could tell from his words. Behind it, there was a killing intent hidden within. Qi Hongchan stood up, cupped his fists, and said, "Everyone, Yu Xiao, Tai Hao, Nan Hua, and Bu Tian have formed an alliance. These 4 sects are my greatest enemies. Yu Xianshao smiled calmly and said, there are 2 forces in this world. If sect leader Qin wants to go to outer space, the demonic sect will not trust me. They should view me as an enemy. Pu Xianqing thought for a while and asked, what about the primordial Yang sect? Sect leader Qin said, although Chu Rui is a rare genius, he is responsible for the rise and fall of a sect. He is too burdened, so he is too conservative. If he is not confident, he will not lean to any side. When the tribulation begins, if I say that I want to go to outer space, as long as he has a safe path of retreat, he will definitely not follow me. Pu Xianqing took in a deep breath and said, in that case, other than our 4 sects and the forces that our sects depend on, all the cultivators in the world will be enemies. Sect leader Qin did not avoid it. He nodded and said, that's right. Yu Xianshao looked calm as if he did not care about his opponents at all. He only said, although there are not many cultivators in our Shaoqing sect, no one in our sect fears death. This time, we can let everyone in the world know the sharpness of our sword. Qi Hongchan's expression became serious. He reminded them, no matter how dangerous the situation is, our Pingda sect will advance and retreat together with you. Sect leader Qin said slowly, once the tribulation begins, it will be a battle of life and death. All the sects will not hold back anymore. They will definitely use their sect-guarding treasures, especially Yu Xiao, who has the help of Butian Pavilion. They have a few magical treasures that are specially used to deal with the 9 continents' great tribulation, so we must be on guard. Today, I called the 3 of you here to discuss how to deal with this matter. Pu Xianshao and Qi Hongchan's hearts trembled slightly. If one only looked at strength, Qinsang and Shaoqing sect already occupied half of the profound sects in the world. With the addition of these 2 sects, even if there was also the devil sect, they could still fight. However, the battle between sects was not so simple. Especially when it involved the sect-guarding treasures of the sects, they had to be even more cautious. Although Butian Pavilion only had 2 heavenly abode masters, at that time, the methods that they could use would probably be far above Taihao sect and Nanhua sect. In this kind of competition, there were no tricks to speak of. If it was 1, then it was 1. If it was 2, then it was 2. It all depended on who had more tricks up their sleeves, and who was more prepared. However, everyone here knew that sect leader Qin had been planning for this matter for close to 1,000 years. The other side was only forced by the Great Tribulation and the power of Qinsong, so they temporarily gathered together. They originally had different thoughts, so they would not pay attention to the way of coordination. As long as they did not give them the chance to unite and plan, they still had a good chance of winning. The 4 sect leaders were discussing countermeasures here. In the Duzhen Palace, Zhang Yan was sitting in the deep abyss heavy water with his eyes closed, training his martial arts. At this moment, a ray of spiritual light suddenly came over, and circled above the soil platform. He felt something in his heart, so he took out a spell and escaped from the heavy water. Then, he raised his hand and summoned the spiritual light. It was a flying letter. He glanced at it and said, so it was Senior Zhou who called me. I think there must be something. He thought for a moment, then touched the space between his eyebrows. A ray of sword light was released, and he went out of the Xuanza ocean realm, heading towards the great pool of dragon abyss below. Along the way, he casually looked around and saw that the disciples were still the same as before. They did not know that the great tribulation was coming. The dozen or so heavenly abode masters in the sect were like the deep sea. On the surface, there were no waves, but on the inside, it was surging. Obviously, after knowing that the mountain gate had broken through the earth barrier, everyone was seizing the opportunity to prepare for the great battle that was not far away. In just a moment, the ray of sword light arrived at the Danding courtyard. Then, it landed on the fish boat, and its silhouette appeared. It said outside, "Is Senior Zhou here?" Junior Zhou sure came fast. Zhou Chengju laughed and walked out. Glancing at him, he turned sideways and said, "Junior Marshal brother, come inside with me to talk." Zhang Yan looked up and saw that there was a lot of white hair on his head. He was surprised and said, Senior Zhou. You are. Zhou Chengju waved his hand and said with a smile, it's fine. I spent too much effort refining pills for the sect earlier, and that's why it's like this. Don't worry, I can't see Lingya die, and I won't be willing to abandon the world no matter what. Zhang Yan followed him into the pavilion. After sitting down, he asked, what kind of pill is it that made Senior Zhou spend so much effort? Zhou Chengju chuckled and said, I was about to tell you, Junior Zhou. At this point, his eyes shone brightly and he said, pills can save people, but they can also hurt people. Long before you entered the Duzhen Hall, the sect leader once asked me to refine a pill that can injure the cultivators of the Grotto Heaven. It's just that I'm not a person of this generation, so it was quite difficult for me to refine it. I only made progress 100 years ago. Zhang Yan sighed and said, if that's the case, why didn't Senior Zhou come to me? Although my alchemy skills are far from Senior Zhou's, I can be considered to have entered the door. I believe I can help Senior Zhou. Zhou Chengju shook his head and said, wouldn't that delay your cultivation? Moreover, this matter was entrusted to me by the sect leader in private, so it's not convenient for me to tell you. Zhang Yan thought for a while and said, Senior Zhou called me here today, is it because the pill has been refined? Zhou Chengju smiled and said, that's exactly why. However, my cultivation is shallow, so it's not easy for me to judge. That's why I invited you here to take a look. He took out a jade bowl from his sleeve and saw that it was filled with clear water. Inside, there was a golden carp the size of a finger. It was swimming around in the water with great agility. With a flick of his finger, the fish flew into the air. As soon as it left the water, it actually grew wings on its back and transformed into a young kingfisher. It chirped and flew around the pavilion as if it was looking for a way out. However, after searching for a long time, it didn't find a way out. Its body actually shattered and turned into many small ants. They crawled all over the ground as if they wanted to find a way out. However, this didn't work. It actually turned into a wisp of smoke and flew into the air. After that, it gave birth to another 10 or so transformations. Zhou Chengju stroked his beard and said, changing according to the spirit, moving according to the time, that's the nature of this pill. Zhang Yan praised, the spiritual vigor of this pill is so weak that it's beyond common sense. If I didn't examine it carefully, I wouldn't have noticed it. If I were to fight with someone and this thing invaded me, I would most likely ignore it and fall into a trap. Senior Zhou is really good. Zhou Chengju smiled and said, it's easier said than done to refine a pill that can injure a person from a heavenly abode. I tried my best and still couldn't achieve it. After thinking about it, why do I have to do this? Even if it's a battle between people from a heavenly abode, it depends on the timing. I only need to temporarily disturb them. As long as their opponent isn't stupid, they can seize the opportunity. As he said this, he sighed and said, this is my proudest work in my life. In the future, if I have the same precious material, even if I have to sacrifice my life, I won't be able to refine it again. He stretched out his hand and the pill that had already turned into a handful of dust flew over and landed in his hand. It turned into a pill and was delivered to Zhang Yan. This time, I have refined a total of 12 wishful spirit pills. I will give this one to junior brother. Chapter 1157. In the Azure Sky Hall, a pretty maid with a beautiful figure entered the hall with a jar in her hands, trembling with fear. On top of the jade platform, there was a flattened monster that looked like a kite lying there. Its body moved up and down, as though it was breathing. It did not have any claws or teeth, as though it was harmless. However, she knew that this was a ferocious monster that the hall master had brought back from somewhere. No matter what kind of beast it was, it would be swallowed by it. The maidservant did not dare to go near it. She placed the jar down from afar and hurriedly retreated. After she left, she could not help but pat her chest in relief. However, she immediately revealed a worried expression. Tomorrow, it will be Sister Chio's turn to deliver food. However, Sister Chio is so timid. Once she enters the hall, she probably won't even be able to move. What if the monster suddenly becomes excited and eats her up? She and the maidservants were all in the form of kingfishers. Strictly speaking, they were also monsters. As for the segment monster, it was refined from the remains of a sky demon. One could imagine how much pressure it exerted on her. Just now, just getting close to it was enough to make her tremble in fear, not to mention coming to deliver food every day. At this moment, in the hall, the segmented monster raised its body and floated up from the jade platform. It glided forward and arrived above the jar. Several long tentacles extended from the edge of the jar. With a light sweep, it lifted the jar into the air and flipped it upside down. From the mouth of the jar, a grayish-white pill the size of a longan sprinkled out. In the belly of the segment monster, there was a long slit, revealing several rows of teeth. It opened its mouth and swallowed. Following that, there was a chewing sound in the hall. It could not swallow spiritual opportunity like a cultivator. Every day, it could only swallow the medicinal stones it had refined to nourish and strengthen itself. However, it was still not satisfied. There was always a desire to bite living things and drink fresh blood. There was a reason for this. Most of the things that formed its body were the remains of a sky demon. It was inevitable that it would be tainted with some demonic nature. Although it did not need to swallow blood, it was born with such a nature. It was difficult to get rid of it, or else it would be restless. Just a little provocation would cause it to become ferocious. Hence, every 3 to 5 days, it had to swallow a mountain elephant. Fortunately, the Azure Sky Hall was comparable to half a continent, especially with the plains and tall mountains outside the hall. Over the years, there were many birds and beasts that had multiplied and strengthened here. They formed their own tribe, and this mountain elephant was taken from the elephant garden. However, the demon severing stage's body was growing too quickly. Not long ago, it was already difficult to satisfy a mountain elephant in a few days. However, the maidservant did not notice it and still dealt with it as usual. Therefore, she appeared a little irritable recently. It could sense that there were countless fresh and delicious food outside the palace. It couldn't bear it any longer and wanted to rush out. However, there was a restriction blocking his way. After ramming against it a few times, he discovered that his entire body was covered in blood. Only the tentacles could reach the outside world. But even so, as soon as he went outside, he would be struck by the lightning, so he could only retreat. The segmented monster let out a few screeches before crouching on the ground with its eyeballs rolling around. He seemed to be thinking of countermeasures. After a long time, its body wriggled for a while, and then a crack appeared on its body. Then, a strange fragrance was released. It smelled like flowers and fruits, and it also smelled like mushrooms. There were many spirit beasts outside the palace. When they smelled the fragrance, they were all attracted over. At this time, a spirit badger had already leaped onto the steps. This beast was raised by a servant girl, so compared to the other birds and beasts, it was a bit bolder. However, just as it approached, a tentacle stretched out and quickly wrapped around it. Then, it was dragged into the hall with incomparable speed. The birds and beasts outside the door were all frightened away. The spirit badger was wrapped in the segmented demon's abdomen. In just a short while, its skin, flesh, bones, and blood had all melted away. After eating its fill, its ferocious aura subsided slightly, and it returned to the jade platform to sleep. A few days later, spiritual light flashed outside the palace. A clear aura came up from below and vibrated the spiritual bell, causing it to ring endlessly, causing the entire palace to hear it. When the aura dissipated, Zhang Yan was already standing on the high platform of the Azure Sky Palace. Su Su had been waiting there since the moment the sound rang out. At that moment, she quickly walked over and bowed. "Greetings, Master." Zhang Yan looked at her and asked, "Get up. How's the segmented demon?" Su Su replied, "According to the palace master's instructions, blood food will be sent to it once in a while, but it's not allowed to eat its fill. However, this strange demon's ferocious aura is getting stronger every day, causing many sisters to not dare to go near it. Onad 2, Zhang Yan asked, has anyone been injured? Su Su shook her head. No. Zhang Yan nodded. It was his intention to send maidservants to deliver the food. Previously, when the segmented demon's intelligence was just born, he had given an order to it that it could devour blood food, but it was not allowed to harm anyone. As long as this demon could resist doing that, it meant that even when it was hungry, it could still suppress its ferocious nature before he, its master, gave the order. If not, it meant that there was a possibility that it could break free from his control. At most, in a few decades, he would be competing with all the perfected ones in the world. This battle was extremely dangerous, and he could not afford to make any mistakes. Even if there was a possibility that this demon would not listen to his orders, he would rather destroy it than bring it with him. He was satisfied with the outcome, so he walked towards the main hall. Once he entered, the segmented demon also noticed his arrival. It immediately revealed a joyful expression and flew into the sky. It kept circling around him and made hissing sounds. However, it was afraid of the spiritual vigor that surged from his body. It seemed to want to get close to him, but it did not dare to get too close. Zhang Yan's gaze focused on its body. After looking for a while, he suddenly flicked his finger. A sword gleam flew out and instantly slashed a wound on the segmented demon's body. The demon wailed and fell to the ground. It was trembling non-stop. Even though it was inexplicably injured, it did not dare to resist at all. At the same time, the wound healed quickly. In just a breath or two, it returned to its original state. Zhang Yan nodded slowly. This demon's body was more than 10 times stronger than the last time he saw it. When it grew up, it would probably be able to display its true ferocity. Sky demons needed to grow with their lifespan before they could produce almighty ones. Normally, this process would take tens of thousands of years. However, this segmented demon was refined using the living refinement technique. It only needed a few decades to pass this period. By then, he would have another trump card in his hands. Seeing that the segmented demon was still trembling, he said, "Get up and cultivate well. The next time I come, I hope that you can block my sword. Otherwise, you will be useless." Onad 3, after saying that, he turned around and walked out of the hall. He said to Su Su, who was waiting at the door, "In the future, double the amount of blood and flesh. The rules are the same as before." Su Suan replied, "Yes, your servant obeys." Zhang Yan flicked his sleeves, and many talismans flew out. He said, "With this talisman on you, you will not have to worry about your life." Su Su was overjoyed and knelt down to thank him. However, she felt a rainbow flash in front of her. When she looked again, she saw that the beam of light had already left the green sky hall and landed in East Flower. On an island in the Great Dragon Lake, Ning Chongxian rode on a breeze and left. As he continued to strike the earth barrier with the 9 return pillars, the gap below became wider and wider. Earth chi surged up and could be harvested with a talisman. There was no need for him to stand guard here. As for Gon and Ji, they had already done what they needed to do. There was no need for them anymore and they were sent back to the small world. This time, he wanted to return to the true purification hall to cultivate. However, halfway there, he was stopped by a child who said that Sun Jinren was summoning him. Since his master was summoning him, he did not hesitate and immediately set off for the Changguan Grotto Heaven. He was very fast and arrived in front of the Grotto Heaven in a short while. After reporting, he entered and stood in front of Sun Jinren. He bowed and greeted, "Disciple greets master." Sun Jinren said, "Since you are already a Grotto Heaven, you can dispense with these formalities if you want." However, Ning Chongxian insisted on finishing the greeting. Sun Jinren shook his head and smiled, "It's up to you." He returned to the couch and sat down. He said, "Sect Master has been planning for hundreds of years. Soon, it will appear in the world. However, most people in this world are short-sighted. Once the calamity is over, there will not be many who are willing to go to the outer world with me. There will be many who are my enemies. Disciple, you must be careful. Ning Chongxian said, as a disciple, I can only fight with all my strength. Sun Jinren nodded his head and said, that's right. Sect Master is in charge of the overall situation. As a disciple, it's useless for us to think too much. However, what we need to prepare cannot be omitted. Otherwise, we will only be showing off our bravery and losing our lives in vain. Ning Chongxian bowed and said, disciple seeks Master's guidance. Sun Jinren said, now that you have entered the elephant realm, you can try to train your fighting skills in these few decades. However, if you want to improve your cultivation, it will not be easy. Especially since you have not opened a grotto heaven, you will lack a life-saving skill. I think it is inappropriate. After thinking about it, I might as well give you the grotto heaven that I obtained in the past. Although the senior who opened this grotto heaven is not compatible with your cultivation, fortunately, you do not need to manage it. His Changguan grotto heaven was opened by himself, but there was another grotto heaven in his hands. This was passed down by the senior, and the Billowing Cloud's secret book was obtained from it. Because it was a spiritual grotto heaven, there was no need to refine it from time to time. That was why it was passed down to him. Ning Chongxian did not decline. He bowed deeply and said, thank you, Master, for your kindness. Sun Jinren said, you are my disciple, of course I should take care of you. It is a pity that spiritual Master Zhuo's grotto heaven went beyond the sky with him. Otherwise, I would have begged for it for you even if I had to put down my pride. Ning Chongxian said, after this success, I received a letter from spiritual Master Zhuo, which recorded the comprehension of the heart, divine arts, and secret arts. I have already benefited a lot from the Tao of the sword. How would I dare to ask for more? Sun Jinren laughed and said, I don't think so. If there are benefits, I should fight for it. How can I give in? If there is injustice, I should speak my mind and criticize right and wrong. This is the way to cultivate Tao. Without waiting for Ning Chongxian to speak, he waved his hand again. Forget it. You have reached this stage, you already have your own Tao. There is no need for me to give you more pointers. With a flick of his sleeve, a talisman flew down. He said, this is the entrance talisman that I have refined. Keep it well. After Ning Chongxian received it, he placed it in his avatar. Sun Jinren said again, there is one more thing. You do not have a protective treasure with you. In the future, you will be at a disadvantage when you face other cultivators. Even if you refine it now, you will not be able to make it in time. You can only try to borrow a treasure from the ancestral hall. The day after tomorrow, Sect Master will summon us to discuss this. Ning Chongxian bowed and said, I will listen to Master's arrangements. Chapter 1158. Yuanyang Sect, Mingbai Mountain. In the night, a ray of light that looked like a shooting star flew towards a temple on the cliff. The ray of light was so fast that it passed through the temple and merged with Xiao Jingdao, who was sitting in the middle of the temple. His body trembled slightly and he opened his eyes. This time, he was asked by his sect to send a clone to investigate a secret that happened in the past. This trip was not in vain and he could be considered to have gained something. A female disciple outside said, Jinren Xiao, someone from Jiyue Palace has come to invite you over for a chat. Xiao Jingdao said, I know. Jiyue Palace was the abode of Jinren Wen, where the Bright Light Cave was located. Although he and this Jinren were not master and disciple in name, they were master and disciple in reality. Even though he had become a cave, he did not dare to be negligent. Therefore, he took a short rest and went on a journey towards a floating island in the sky. After a few thousand feet, the fog in front of him dispersed and revealed a row of cloud stairs. On both sides of the stairs, there were palace maids on flying boats with big lights and bright pearls, illuminating the night sky. In the midst of the colorful clouds, there was a small mountain and in front of it was a bamboo arch bridge. From afar, it looked exquisite, but in reality, it was quite big enough to cross a whale. When he arrived here, out of respect, he stopped flying and landed on the bridge. A beautiful lady with snow-white skin came up and said, Palace Master and Jinren Wu are already waiting inside, please come in, Jinren Xiao. Qiao Jingdao thought to himself, so Jinren Wu is here too, then it must be for that matter. After crossing the bridge, he passed through a sea of jasper flowers and arrived at a palace with embroidered curtains. He saw a big gauze curtain hanging above, from which came the sound of melodious music, and there were hundreds of women dancing to the music. When he was outside the tent, he heard a voice from inside, "Is it the righteous path?" He answered and entered the tent. He bowed and said, "Disciple greets the two Zenrens." Jinren Wen said happily, "You came at the right time." This song is a new composition by junior apprentice Sister Wu's disciple, Mother Guan. We can enjoy it together. Qiao Jingdao bowed again and sat down on the guest seat. Immediately, a maid came to the table and served a precious spiritual fruit. He watched from the side and did not interrupt. He knew that although this enlightened master had a hobby of listening to music and watching dances, he was not a Taoist master. However, it was not to enjoy the pleasures of the world, but to hold on to his mortal heart and prevent himself from falling into ruthlessness. At present, the few spiritual masters of the Yuan Yang sect all had their own preferences. Moreover, he had just entered the heavenly passage, and the cultivation technique he used was of the highest level. It was the time for him to work hard, so there was no need for him to act like this. When the song ended, Immortal Wen cast a glance at a beautiful woman beside him, and the latter clapped her hands. After all the dancers and musicians left the tent, Enlightened Wen turned around and asked, "Righteous Path, how was your trip? Did you find anything?" Qiao Jingdao bowed and said, "I was about to report to you, Jinren. I have indeed found some clues on this trip." Sage Wu was surprised and said, "Oh, you really found it? Does sect leader know about it?" Qiao Jingdao replied, "We haven't gotten the real results yet. I didn't dare to report this to the sect leader." After the Yuan Yang sect established itself, it had been obsessed with the treasures of the Honghe Temple. With the arrival of the Great Calamity, his desire for it became even more urgent. However, it had searched all the places that should have been searched, including the original small sects of the Honghe Temple. However, it still didn't find any clues. If it wasn't for the fact that Chu Rui, the sect leader, believed that the internal strife of the Honghe Temple wasn't done in a hurry, it was impossible that they didn't leave a way out. They probably would have given up on such a move long ago. After Qiao Jingdao achieved the heavenly passage, he proposed an idea. He thought that the Honghe Temple moved from the West Continent, so the treasure might not be hidden in the East Flower Continent. Perhaps there were some clues left in the West Continent. Therefore, he volunteered to send his avatar to investigate this place. This trip took more than 10 years. The original mountain of the Honghe Temple has long been submerged in a vast ocean. I searched for a long time, but I couldn't find anything useful. Later, I broke into a secret palace. The owner died early, but there were many talismans left by the people of the same sect. After some deduction and investigation, I think that at least before the West Continent cultivators came east, the Honghe Temple had a small world that was used to store the treasures of the sect, and the entrance talisman was only held by one person. Sage Wu thought for a while and said, "The secret palace that the righteous people broke into should be the place where the body of an ancestor of the sect stayed. This person must have a high status, or it could be a clue that the Honghe Temple intentionally left for the later generations. So it is not surprising that it could avoid the catastrophe and survive for thousands of years without being damaged." Then, she looked a little excited and said, "So, sect leader Jinren's guess is correct." But Sage Wen shook his head and said, "But if there is someone in charge of this sect, why hasn't anyone entered the world to cultivate for so many years?" The previous sect master and senior sect master both personally went to the Heaven Mending Pavilion and inquired about the number of small realms that had opened in the past several thousand years. Apart from the changes within the various sects that we had no way of knowing, the rest could be traced back to their roots. They had nothing to do with the Great Unity Monastery. Qiao Jingdao said, "I have a question. Did Butian Pavilion only investigate the Donghua continent, or the 9 continents?" Sage Wen sighed and said, "Of course it was the 9 continents. But this also cost the sect more than half of the elixir jade. Because of this, this matter has to be investigated." Qiao Jingdao thought for a while and said, from the letters, the person in charge of the Honghe Temple's talisman weapon might not be a cultivator, but a commoner. I didn't pay much attention to it before. Maybe it really is possible. Not a cultivator. Sage Wen frowned. Her first thought was that she didn't believe it. How could such a treasure, which was related to the rise and fall of the sect, be in the hands of a commoner? But after thinking about it, she felt that it was really possible. Wu Jinren's beautiful eyes flashed as she said, if that's the case, then it makes sense. But the sea of people is vast, it might not be easier to find. If he accidentally falls into the hands of other sects, then that's even worse. Qiao Jingdao said, it is not easy to find. If the Honghe Temple really left this item in the hands of a commoner, then it must be a noble family. Otherwise, if a commoner was in a chaotic world, he would be like a floating duckweed. He couldn't even protect his family's life, so how could he keep this magical item? This person's clan must have existed since the destruction of the Honghe Temple. As long as we check how many families are still there, if we are lucky, we might be able to find something. Sage Wu's beautiful eyes brightened and said, that is easy. Let me calculate a little and we will know. She was about to cast a spell when Reverend Wen stopped her and said, Shimmy, slow down. Since this involves Honghe Monastery, we need to be careful. Since it involves the Honghe Temple, we must be careful. Sage Wu was also aware of the danger. She put down her hand and said with lingering fear, Senior sister is right. If it was just to calculate the affairs of the commoners, it was easy for her. But if the Honghe Temple made some arrangements, not only would she not know the inside story. It was very likely that he would be schemed against, resulting in a loss of lifespan and vitality. Sage Wen called the beautiful woman in and said a few words to her. The latter understood and left. About a quarter of an hour later, two old women with walking sticks came in. They looked like candles in the wind. Seeing the three cave Zenrins here, they couldn't help but be afraid. They went forward and bowed shakily. Sage Wen said, I think you know what I want you to do. But it is dangerous. If you are not willing, you can go back. One of the old women bowed and said, we don't have long to live. Being able to serve the sect is a good thing that we can't ask for. If something unexpected happens, I only hope that the sect can protect our clan's disciples. Sage Wen said, okay. I agree. The old woman bowed again and said, thank you, Jinren. She knew this Jinren's temper. She didn't say anything else. She sat down and began to calculate the commoners' families that survived the destruction of the Honghe Temple. After checking, there were more than 70 families. She then calculated them one by one. She wanted to see if they had any opportunities. Before every calculation, she first wrote down the origin of the family. The process was smooth at first, but when she checked a family, her body suddenly trembled. She revealed a look of disbelief. Then, her body suddenly turned into ashes and scattered in the big tent. Sage Wen stood up and looked at the paper. He said in a deep voice, Qinghuai Chao family. Sage Wu's face was filled with anticipation and asked, is it this family? Sage Wen shook his head and said, I can't be sure yet. But the karma behind it could turn a Yuanying cultivator into ashes in an instant. It is obvious that it has a great background. Qiao Jingdao was still calm and said, Jinren, why don't you check the rest of the families first? Spiritual Master Wen nodded and called for another old woman. Although the latter had seen the scene just now, she had already cast aside the matter of life and death. With Spiritual Master Wen's help, she did not hesitate and continued to calculate. However, this time, until the end of the investigation of these clans, there were no changes. Sage Wen no longer hesitated and said to the beautiful woman, send the disciples immediately. Remember, don't make any moves. Don't alarm any sections. The beautiful woman said, I will arrange it now. Sage Wen turned around and said, please sit down. I believe it won't take long for the news to come. We will know whether it is related to the Honghe Temple. Sage Wu and Qiao Jingdao nodded. The Yuanyang sect had been searching for this for thousands of years. They were not in a hurry. The three of them waited for about half a day. Suddenly, they felt a spiritual change in the southwest direction. They were shocked and hurriedly used their mana to look. They saw that near the Qing River, a small portal was opened. Then, a beam of light climbed up and reached tens of thousands of feet high. Sage Wu's expression changed and she cried out, "Oh no!" Before her voice died away, the beam of light suddenly dispersed and turned into more than 30 message talismans, flying in all directions. The direction of the message talismans was the main gate of the various sects. In Qinsang School, in order to deal with the catastrophe, the 14 Dongtian masters were discussing in the main hall. They felt the change immediately. At the same time, they saw one of the message talismans flying towards the Great Lake of Dragon Lake. Soon, it arrived in front of the main gate. Mengzhen turned around and asked, "Master?" Sect leader Qin waved his horsetail whisk and in an instant, a message talisman appeared in the hall. The talisman landed in front of the stairs, and with a flash of light, a Taoist wearing a tall hat appeared. He bowed and said, "May I ask if you are the current sect master of the Dark Azure sect?" Sect leader Qin replied, "Yes, who are you?" The Taoist stood up and said seriously, "I am Ren Hong, the leader of the Honghe Temple." Although the other party called himself the sect master, not a single person stood up. Everyone could tell that it was merely a wisp of soul consciousness. As for this person's name, they had heard of him before. He was the last sect master of Honghe Temple, and he had passed away several thousand years ago. Sect leader Qin asked, "Honored sir has come here to see me?" The Taoist said, "The disciples of the Honghe Temple were unfilial, which led to the disaster of our sect. Our orthodoxy was cut off, and no one inherited the precious treasure of our sect. So this time." At this point, he raised his head and said loudly, "I am willing to offer this to all the people in the world." Chapter 1159. Ren Hong seemed to have returned to Qinsang School to say these words. After he finished speaking, he cupped his hands towards Sect Master Qin and a faint smile appeared on his face. His figure slowly faded away and disappeared from the main hall. Mengzhen thought for a moment, then turned his head and said, "Sect leader master, just now, I have taken a closer look. There are 33 talismans in total, and they are not in my family alone. Instead, they are distributed to the four corners. I believe that many sects in the Donghua continent, including the Devil's Clan, have heard of this news." Sun Jinren sneered and said, "The Honghe Monastery has been destroyed for thousands of years, but this sect leader is still restless after he passed away. He still wants to throw out the treasures and let the people of the world fight over them." Reverend Yen looked over and said, "Then, junior apprentice brother, do you think you should go up and compete?" Sun Jinren replied without hesitation, "Why wouldn't I fight for it? After all, it's an important treasure of the sect. If you don't get it, it might be taken away by Yu Xiao's side and become their helper. If the tribulation begins, wouldn't it be disadvantageous to me?" The Honghe Monastery was not a small sect. It had a long history and was a large sect that came from the Western continent. Its sect guarding magic treasure was not something an ordinary treasure could compare to. No matter which sect obtained it, they would immediately have a good bargaining chip in their hands. This time, the treasure was personally given by the sect leader. Even if he obtained it, it would be perfectly justifiable and he wouldn't need to bear any karma. Sect leader Qin looked to his right and said, "What does perfected Shao think?" Perfected being Shao pondered for a moment before replying, "The calamity is coming. As long as it doesn't hinder my great plan, I can do anything. Moreover, if the Qinsang school does not interfere in this matter, it will not be able to do anything about it. It doesn't make sense." Sect leader Qin nodded and looked at Zhang Yan. "What did Hall Master Duzhen say?" Zhang Yan smiled. He said, "The Honghe Temple has been silent for thousands of years. This small world wouldn't have opened for no reason. Someone must have done it. I heard that the Yuanyang sect has been looking for this world. This time, the place where the world opens is near the Qing River, so it must be related to it. However, if he succeeded, he would definitely think of ways to cover it up. It couldn't have caused such a commotion that the whole world would hear about it. Perhaps something unforeseen has happened. When the perfected persons heard this, they could not help but shake their heads and smile. It was not hard to imagine that the Yuanyang sect had planned to take this small world and all the treasures in it for themselves. But now, he had outsmarted himself. Zhang Yan continued, among our allies, the number of treasures we have is less than that of the other side. Just as Sun Jinren said, even if I can't get it, I can't let Yu Xiao get it. Disciple believes that in the end, this matter needs to be discussed by all the sections. Only then will we be able to come to a conclusion. Qi Yuntian also agreed. He suggested, sect leader spiritual master, disciple thinks that we can send a spiritual master to guard this place earlier. Shen Baishuang said, sect master and the hall masters must not act rashly. I'm willing. Zhang Yan nodded and said, Jinren Shen is indeed a suitable person. Shen Baishuang's seniority was high, and his cultivation was not weak either. With him speaking, the perfected persons naturally had no objections. Sect leader Qin said, then I'll have to trouble junior brother to go to the central continent. Shen Baishuang hurriedly stood up and said that he did not dare. 2 hours later, all the matters were discussed. 2 hours later, the perfected Dong Tian in the hall left. Zhang Yan reached the door but did not leave. After a while, a child came and said, Perfected Zhang, sect leader invites you. Zhang Yan followed him to the back of the hall. Seeing sect leader Qin sitting on a cushion, he went forward and bowed before sitting down. Sect leader Qin asked, just now, I'm observing Hall Master Du Zhen's expression. It seems like he has something to say. Zhang Yan smiled and said, disciple does have something to say, but just now, when all the perfected persons are here, it's a little inconvenient. Sect leader Qin nodded and said, there are only 2 of us here, so you can say it clearly. Zhang Yan looked a little serious and said, disciple thinks that this time, we can either fall out with Yu Xiao and fight for the treasure. Otherwise, with him and I restraining each other, neither of us can achieve what we want. If Yu Xiao supports Yuan Yang to get the treasure, as long as our Qinsang school objects, it is equivalent to indirectly helping Yuan Yang to win over this sect. Even if after the human tribulation, Yuan Yang's sect was unlikely to stand on the side of Qinsang, they might not be against it. At this time, it was unwise to take the initiative to push it into Yu Xiao's arms, and it was not something he wanted to see. Sect leader Qin said, since Hall Master Du Zhen has made this proposal, do you have a countermeasure? Zhang Yan's eyes flickered slightly and he said, Qinsang can't get it, and Yu Xiao can't get it, but it doesn't mean that we can't get it elsewhere. We might as well find a place for it. Sect leader Qin smiled and said, I already know what Hall Master Du Zhen wants. Fine, let's do it according to your plan. Inside the mountain gate of Butian Pavilion, sect leader Tan Dingxian's face was gloomy as he watched the world's spiritual energy being sucked in by the open door. He sighed and said, it's obviously a sect that has been dead for thousands of years. Why is it jumping out now to join in the fun? What he hated the most was the appearance of things that were not under his control. In his opinion, the current world's sects should be like the sun, the moon, and the stars in the sky. Everyone should stay in their place and keep to their own duties. This was the right way to go. Bu Jingsu also felt bad and said, Senior, this small world appeared at the wrong time. The world's spiritual energy is getting scarce day by day, and Qinsang and Yu Xiao are confronting each other. Perhaps in the near future, they will shed all pretense of cordiality and fight each other. Currently, the 2 sects are restraining themselves, but if they start fighting because of this, it will not be a blessing for the eastern continent. Tan Dingxian's expression was heavy as he said, we can only try our best to mediate. What's more hateful is that Honghe Temple even sent a message to the devil sect. I don't know what they want to do. Bu Jingsu's expression was strange as he said, they probably resent me for not helping Honghe Temple when they were in danger. Tan Dingxian snorted and said, everything has its ups and downs. What's there to be angry about? Bu Jingsu repeatedly agreed. In reality, he understood in his heart that if the same thing happened to the Heaven Mending Pavilion, then this senior disciple would have a different excuse. Tan Dingxian thought for a while and sighed, it seems that this time, I still have to go personally. I just hope I can appease these two sections. At this time, in Yuan Yang's sect, spiritual master Wen received the reply from the disciple he sent out. Only now did he know the whole story. It turned out that after the disciple received the order to go out, he quickly found the Qinghui Chao clan and confirmed that their ancestors were indeed related to Honghe Temple. The clan had been worshipping a legendary immortal item for generations. He should have waited for the successor of Honghe Temple to appear before handing it over to him. However, for some reason, such a person had not appeared for a long time. As time passed, he naturally forgot about this matter and only treated this item as a more precious ancestral heirloom. When the item first came into his hands, the disciple couldn't believe that the item that the sect had been searching for so long had fallen into his hands so easily. But what happened next made him panic. This item actually borrowed a strand of his qi and opened an entrance to the boundary. Then, more than 30 message talismans flew in all directions. He couldn't even stop them in time. After this incident, he didn't even dare to return to his sect. He could only stay at the boundary and send back letters to report the details of the situation. At the same time, he also tried to defend himself. After Qiao Jingdao finished listening, he judged, this disciple was innocently implicated. I thought that with the arrangement of Honghe Temple, only a person with some kind of secret technique would be able to open the door of the small world without any commotion. If other cultivators touched it, it would announce the spiritual opportunity and send out a message talisman. All cultivators in the world would know about it and no one would be able to keep it to themselves. In fact, with a great enemy outside, compared to finding a handsome disciple to inherit their Taoism, Honghe Temple's action was actually better to preserve their heritage. At least in the future, the sects that benefited from this sect would try to take care of the aftermath, just for the sake of their reputation. Spiritual Master Wen said with a serious expression, all the sects have been alarmed. I believe that they will soon come to fight for this treasure. Righteous path, you go to the boundary first and try to guard the entrance. If something goes wrong, I will go to the sect leader to ask for forgiveness. Spiritual Master Wu stood up and said, Senior sister, I will go with you. Spiritual Master Wen hesitated and said, Junior sister, it is better for you to go with the righteous path to guard the entrance. You must know that this time, not only Xian men will intervene, I am afraid that the devil sect will also take advantage of the situation. Spiritual Master Wu felt a chill in his heart and felt that this was reasonable. He could only say, this matter has come to this point, it is not your fault. Sect leader Jinren is reasonable and will not blame you. Spiritual Master Wen shook his head and said, blame is a small matter. I am afraid that I will have to face a difficult problem. She came out of the cave and walked to the front of Dayuan Jingxin Hall. Her qi dynamic immediately caused the bell and drum to ring. A boy immediately came out and said, Sect leader invites Spiritual Master into the hall to talk. Spiritual Master Wen entered the hall and after bowing to Chu Rui, he described the matter. After listening, Chu Rui said, this is not your fault. Honghe Temple's arrangement looks simple but it is very difficult to break. I think they have planned this long ago. Spiritual Master Wen said, Sect leader Shixiang, then what should I do later? Chu Rui looked outside the hall and said, the treasure is secondary. Qin Song and Yuxiao families are likely to use this matter to force me to make a choice. Spiritual Master Wen looked slightly nervous and said, then what should we do? Chu Rui smiled and waved his hand, saying, don't panic. It is not that easy to make Yuan Yang sect submit. At this moment, a boy outside the door said, Yuxiao School Spiritual Master Wu is here. He said that he wants to see sect leader Jinren. Chu Rui said lightly, he is fast. Invite him up. Spiritual Master Wen suggested, sect leader Shixiang, should we wait until after Qinsang school comes? Chu Rui smiled and said, you want to wait for the two families to come here and use the conflict between them to restrict each other so that Yuan Yang sect can benefit from it? He shook his head and said, this is only a small plan, it will not affect the overall situation. He waved his sleeve, and the boy outside the hall bowed and left to pass on the order. Not long after, a Taoist wearing a green robe walked in. He glanced around the hall and bowed with a smile, saying, Yu Xiao Wu Fenggu, greets sect leader Chu and spiritual master Wen. Chu Rui raised his hand and bowed back, saying with a smile, is spiritual master Wu here to get the treasure? Wu Fenggu shook his head and said, I am afraid sect leader Chu is wrong. He raised his head and looked at Chu Rui with bright eyes, saying, Yu Xiao, know that Yuan Yang's sect has been searching for the treasure of Honghe Temple for thousands of years and has made many things out of your mind. Now that the treasure has appeared, it is something that your sect should get. Therefore, I am here to help you get the treasure. To be continued. Chapter 1160. After Shen Baishuang came out of the hall, he went back to the cave abode to give some instructions. On the same day, he rode the pagoda out of the mountain gate and headed towards the place where the spiritual light bloomed in Zhongzhou. After half a day, he arrived at the shore of Qing River. He looked up and saw that there seemed to be a hole in the sky. The spiritual vigor surged into it, and the swirling air mass spread out for dozens of miles. There were flashes of lightning from time to time, and the sound was incessant. He silently sensed that the person who opened up the small world had already thought of this. The inside was vast and deep, and it could accommodate all the clones of the Dongtian from various sections. It should not be a big problem, so he drove the pagoda and rushed in. Although he was walking up, the moment he entered, he felt like he was sinking, and there was a feeling of heaven and earth turning upside down. After a while, the pagoda shook, as if a layer of air barrier was broken, and he was already inside the border. Looking around, there were hundreds of floating peaks, and there was a spring waterfall washing down, like a crystal curtain hanging in the sky, straight into a bottomless abyss. As he was looking, there was a rainbow in front of him, and it stopped a few miles away. A petite female cultivator came out, and she bowed and said, Jinren Shen from Qinsang School has arrived. Greetings. Shen Baishuang returned the greeting and said, Jinren Wu, greetings. Jinren Wu raised her wrist, pointed to a floating peak not far away, and said, Jinren Shen, the Yuan Yang sect has built a few altars here, and that one is for your sect. This time, the treasure is born, and it cannot be decided by one sect. Why don't we wait for the other Taoist friends to arrive, and then we can make a decision. What do you think, Jinren Shen? Shen Baishuang could tell that the Yuan Yang sect was obviously claiming to be the owner of this place, but he didn't care about it at all. After all, the ultimate treasure of the Honghe Taoist sect was not something that could be decided just by doing this. Therefore, Shen Baishuang didn't reject the Yuan Yang sect's request. He just nodded and turned around. After he landed on the mountain peak, he drove away all the servants and maids that the Yuan Yang sect had arranged here, and went into the tower to cultivate. About a day later, there was a voice outside the door, Jinren Shen, is it convenient? Ping Du Wu Wei is here to pay his respects. When Shen Baishuang heard that, he retreated from his meditation. Now that the Ping Du sect followed the lead of the Qinsang school, he had already expected the visit of the Grotto Heaven sect's cultivator. He opened the pagoda's door and said, Taoist Wu, please come in and sit. Perfected Master Wu and Shen Baishuang could be considered old acquaintances. When they arrived at the pagoda, they exchanged some pleasantries before getting down to business. He asked, does your sect want this treasure? Shen Baishuang said, I also want to, but Yu Xiao will certainly not allow it. Unless our two families fight it out first, there won't be a result, and now is not the right time. Enlightened Master Wu nodded repeatedly to show that he understood. Then he said in a deep voice, if your esteemed sect can't get it, then you won't let Yu Xiao get it. Who knows who will benefit from it in the end? Shen Baishuang said, this advantage is not easy to take. If we handle this appropriately, we won't necessarily suffer a loss. Enlightened Master Wu was curious and said, then what do you mean, Jinren Shen? Shen Baishuang did not say it out loud. Instead, he transmitted a few words to Shen Baishuang. Shen Baishuang was surprised after listening to it. He thought for a while and said, Jinren Shen, rest assured. I know what to do. After getting the answer, he sat for a while. Then he left. 2 hours later, Huanjin Temple's Jinren Pang also came to visit the pagoda. After a discussion with Shen Baishuang, they stopped at a floating peak not far from here. Another day passed. A Yuan Yang disciple came outside the pagoda and said, "Jinren Shen, my sect's Jinren invites you." Shen Baishuang drove the pagoda and followed the disciple's guidance to the front of a large peak. Yuan Yang's sect had only been in this small realm for a day or two, but because they saw themselves as the host, they built a large platform here. Therefore, a large platform was built here, and many flying palaces and buildings were moved here to decorate it. The surrounding clouds were thick and the mist was vast and indistinct. He looked around and saw Yuan Yang's sect's Jinren Wen and Jinren Wu standing on the platform and bowing to him. He returned the bow from afar and descended. At the same time, there were rays of spiritual light and clear qi coming over. It was the Zenrens from various sections. They rode on flying boats, spiritual birds, and strange leaves. They arrived at the peak and after greeting Jinren Wen, they all landed on the peak. Shen Baishuang looked over and saw that out of the 10 sects of Xian men, 8 had arrived. Only Shaoqing and Lishan's sect had not arrived. Shaoqing's sect's whereabouts were hard to pinpoint. They might come or they might not, so there was no need to investigate. As for Lishan's sect, after Jinren Yuling left, no one had entered the heavenly abode state. There was no hope of obtaining the treasure, so it made no difference whether they came or not. At this moment, no one from the 6 demonic sects had arrived. He did not know if the talisman from the demonic sects had other reasons, or if they knew that they could not compete with Xian men, so they gave up on the idea. Jinren Wen stood at the top of the platform and looked around at the people from the various sects. He said, "All of you Zenrens have received the talisman from Honghe sect and are here for the treasure. We can decide who will get their hands on this treasure later. Before that, I need to make one thing clear. Honghe Temple was originally a sect of my Xian sect. Its sect's precious treasure should not fall into the hands of the devil sect. Therefore, I would like to make an agreement with everyone. If the devil sect comes, I hope that my Xian sect can join hands to chase them away." Wu Fenggu laughed and said loudly, "Jinren Wen is right. Since our Xianmen treasure is here, we cannot let the demonic sects steal it. Otherwise, we will lose face. If they come, I, Yu Xiao, am willing to help chase them away." When he spoke, Taihao, Nanhua, and Butian all expressed their agreement. This was to target the demonic sects and exclude them. Shen Baishuang would not stop them and nodded in agreement. Wu Zhen immediately agreed. As for Jinren Pang, since they were dealing with the demonic sects, as a cultivator of the Huanjin sect, she would not be polite and agreed. Jinren Wen said, "My Origin Yang disciples have searched the inner realm for the past 2 days and have found the treasure, but they don't dare to take it." Everyone, as she spoke to this point, there was a sudden rumble from outside. However, just as the sound entered the hearts of the crowd, it suddenly disappeared without a trace, as if it had been erased halfway through. All the Taoist grotto heaven felt that just now, there were at least 2 forces colliding. It was obvious that cultivators of the same generation were fighting in the outer realm. They were a bit surprised. Who would do something like this at a time like this? When he looked outside, he saw a flash of light at the realm gate. A woman wearing a tight-fitting robe with a collared collar came in. Her face was beautiful and her eyes were bright. Her hair was combed into 2 buns and she was wearing a plain, thin dress. Around her was a dot of sword light that twinkled like a star. Even though she was not moving, it was obvious that she was filled with killing intent. So it's Taoist Lu from the Shaoqing sect. When everyone saw this female cultivator, they immediately recognized her. They all had different thoughts and guessed why she was here. Wu Fenggu thought, in the past, when treasures appeared in the continent, the Shaoqing sect never cared about them. Why are they here now? Do they also want to steal the treasure? The woman came closer and bowed. Lu Shirong greets fellow Taoists of the Taoist sects. Everyone didn't dare to be careless and returned the greeting. At this time, Tan Dingxian asked, "Spiritual Master Lu, may I ask, did you have a conflict with someone with the commotion outside just now?" Taoist Lu casually said, "Nothing, but just now, I chased a Taoist master of the demonic sect here and killed him in front of the realm gate." Tan Dingxian was shocked. "Oh. Which sect of the demonic sect is he from?" Taoist Lu frowned. "I have killed all the demonic sect cultivators that came. I believe all the people from the 6 sects are here." Everyone looked at each other. Apart from being shocked, they were also fearful. Although they had only sent their clones here this time, it was not a big deal even if they lost them. However, this was clearly shaming the demonic sect. In the world, only Shaoqing would dare to do this. If the demonic sect didn't want to fall out with them immediately, they could only suffer this loss. Wu Fenggu praised, "Taoist Lu is righteous and cleansed the demonic qi. You have displayed the righteousness of our Taoist sects, I am really impressed." Taoist Lu looked over and said seriously, "This Taoist Lu is wrong. Shirong can only compete with fellow disciples in the sect. Even outside, I can't stretch my limbs because I'm afraid that the continent will be destroyed. I find it boring. This time, I don't have to worry about this. That's why I went to find a few fellow Taoists to spar. To put it bluntly, it's for my own selfish reasons. However, if you are interested, you can come and give me some pointers at any time. I will be delighted." When Taoist Wen heard this, she was afraid that this Taoist Lu would really find people to fight if he got angry. Before anyone said anything, she interrupted, "Taoist Lu, you came at the right time. I'm going to see the treasure with all of you. If you are interested, why don't you come along?" Taoist Lu thought about it and said, "All right. Since you're here, let's go take a look." Taoist Wen and Taoist Wu each boarded a chariot and rose with the wind. Their sleeves fluttered as they led the way. The Taoist masters of the various sects followed behind. After traveling for tens of thousands of miles, a floating continent gradually appeared in front of them. Taoist Wen pointed forward and said, "It's here." Everyone took a look and saw that there were no mountains, valleys, lakes, or rivers on the continent. There was only a single tree. This tree was very strange. It did not grow upwards, but instead fell horizontally on the ground. It was crooked and undulating, like a tangled vine or a swimming dragon. On the highest branch, there was a tall and beautiful golden branch. It was only 3 feet tall, and its upper half seemed to be hung with something heavy. It was slightly bent, and there was a small flower and leaf on it. It stood in the wind, and as it swayed, there was a clear sound of metal striking jade, and it was pleasing to the ears. Tan Dingxian took a few glances, stroked his beard and said, "This must be the treasure of Honghe Temple, the Divine Beauty Golden Branch." Originally, this branch had 7 leaves. When the West Continent migrated eastward, it was mostly used against the heavenly demons. Only 1 leaf is left. If this leaf is removed, this golden branch will need tens of thousands of years of spiritual opportunity to be transformed before it can regain its original appearance. When Taoist Master Shi of Taihao School arrived, he did not care about the golden branch. Instead, he stared at the strange tree. There was a slight excitement in his expression. He pondered for a while and walked out. He stood in front and bowed deeply to everyone. He said, "Fellow Taoists, I, Taihao, know that I am not virtuous and dare not fight for the precious branch. I only wish to get the tree under my feet. That is enough. I hope that fellow Taoists can fulfill my wish." Chapter 1161. Jinren Shi gave up on the treasure and took the initiative to ask for the strange wood. Most of the people present were happy to see this happen. As for whether or not there was anything special about the wood, they did not want to find out. In today's world, only Taihao School had the deepest understanding of this art. It was useless for other cultivators to take it. Jinren Wen and Jinren Wu secretly communicated with each other through telepathy. They thought that it was fine to give up the wood. Even if they could not get the treasure from Honghe Temple, at least they would owe them a favor. So he said, "Jinren Shi, Yuanyang sect does not want this wood. What do you think?" Wu Fenggu smiled and said, "In my opinion, Jinren Shi's request is not too much." Jinren Wu hesitated and said, Jinren Shen, what do you think? Shen Baishuang thought for a while. The cultivation method of Taihao school was closely related to the few divine woods in the sect. To him, the heavenly golden branch was not necessarily more useful than the strange wood. However, he had no reason to stop this. Even if he did, it would not be good for him to say anything. So he said, I have no objection. Jinren Wu thought to himself, Taihao school could not get the treasure. It seems that they are taking a step back, but it is actually a bargain. Seeing that no one objected, Jinren Shi was secretly happy. However, Jinren Lu of Shaoqing sect did not say anything, so he could not pretend that he did not hear it. So he asked, Jinren Lu, what do you think? But as soon as he said it, he regretted it immediately. Jinren Lu said, are you asking me? If I say that Jinren Shi wants the wood. So what if you win the sword in my hand? Jinren Shi was shocked. Jinren Lu blinked his beautiful eyes and said, I was just joking. He said, I was just joking. Could it be that Jinren took it seriously? I don't want that strange rattan wood. Jinren Shi's lips moved, but he did not know what to say. Just now, looking at Jinren Li's serious face, he did not think that she was joking at all. He felt that he could not figure out this woman's temperament, so he did not dare to provoke her anymore. Everyone bowed deeply and said, thank you, fellow Taoists. I can't thank you enough. After saying that, he didn't say anything else and silently retreated to the side. Enlightened Master Wen turned around and said, fellow Taoists. Why don't we discuss the ownership of the Golden Branch? After a moment of silence, Tan Dingxian said, although Honghe Temple is willing to give its treasures to our fellow Taoists under the heavens, precious treasures are rare, and not everyone can have their wishes fulfilled. In my humble opinion, fellow Taoist of Primordial Yang sect has inherited Honghe Temple's spirit cave, and the appearance of the small portal was also done by fellow Taoist of Primordial Yang sect, so this treasure should belong to him. What do you think? When Taoist Master Pang heard this, she frowned and said, Sect Master Tan. The reason why we are here today is because of the talisman left behind by Ren Hong, the sect leader of Honghe Temple. Isn't it a little inappropriate for you to overrule the will of your predecessor with just a sentence? Tan Dingxian sighed and said, Taoist Pang, you should be able to understand. If there is a dispute, no one is allowed. It will inevitably ruin the harmony of our celestial sect of wonders. This is a move that does not make up for the losses. Taoist Master Pang shook her head and said, there is always a way to satisfy both sides. Taoist Master Xian interrupted and said, oh, then I would like to hear Taoist Master Pang's so-called way to satisfy both sides. If what you say makes sense, then it's fine. Taoist Master Pang looked up and said, if it really doesn't work, then we will follow the sword fighting method, and each sect will send out their disciples to fight to determine the ownership. As soon as he said this, Taoist Master Lu, who seemed to be indifferent to this, suddenly said, this is a good idea. Everyone couldn't help but hesitate. This method could be said to avoid direct competition between the Taoist masters of Dongtian, and it was indeed suitable for the current situation. In this way, the treasure could fall into the hands of any sect. Although the three sects had a higher chance of winning, they still had hope. Therefore, they were also tempted. Wu Fenggu felt that something was wrong. He came back here to show that he supported Yuan Yang's sect in obtaining the treasure, and he wanted to use this favor to win them over. However, if this matter was decided by the disciples of each sect, then Yuan Yang's sect would not need to rely on Yu Xiao at all, and they could fight on their own. Then, his previous plan would be completely useless. At this moment, his mind turned quickly, and he immediately came up with a countermeasure. He raised his arm and said loudly, everyone, I think this is inappropriate. He looked at Taoist Master Pang and said, Taoist Master Pang, have you forgotten about the 6 demonic sects? Yes, this time they were killed by Taoist Master Lu, but with Ren Hong's talisman as proof, they still have the status. If they hear about this matter and also send their disciples to fight for it, should we stop them? Unfortunately, the treasure will fall into the hands of the demonic sects, and I don't think this is what everyone wants. At this point, he laughed coldly and said, "As for Sect Master Ren's actions, I think it is extremely inappropriate. It's not that I'm disrespectful to the ancestors, but he doesn't distinguish between the mystical and demonic, good and evil, and actually passed on the sect's treasure. For a sect to be like this, one can imagine what kind of situation the sect was in. No wonder this sect was destroyed so early in the past. If it was still around, Yu Xiao, would definitely attack it." Shen Baishuang looked at him coldly. How could he not see through Wu Fenggu's plan? He wanted to ruin Ren Hong's reputation, and then he would be able to make his own arrangements. However, when Ren Hong passed on the talisman, he didn't care about the mystical and demonic sections. This lack of consideration would indeed cause people to criticize him, but there was no way to tell. At this time, enlightened Master Wu looked over, and Shen Baishuang nodded slightly to him. Enlightened Master Wu coughed and stood up, saying, "Everyone, please listen to me." When everyone's gazes turned to him, he said, "If this heavenly beauty golden branch was placed tens of thousands of years ago, when all 7 leaves were present, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that it was the sect's treasure. But now, only 1 leaf remains, and its power is actually limited. Why fight over it and hurt the harmony between the sects for no reason?" Tan Dingxian agreed this time, saying, "Indeed, for a mere treasure, it really isn't worth it." Enlightened Master Xian said, "Since Enlightened Master Wu says so, you must have some otherwise opinion." Enlightened Master Wu bowed slightly and said, "I don't dare. I just have some shallow opinions. Everyone here, every sect has a treasure to guard their mountain gate. Among the 10 sects of the Xian men, only Lishan sect doesn't have such a treasure. Thus, in these years, we have been repeatedly attacked by the demonic sects, both in the open and in the dark. Even the lower sects have rebelled incessantly, and I can't bear it. Seeing that we're all from the same path as Xian men, I only have one suggestion. Why don't we give this treasure to Lishan?" Wu Fenggu heard this. He first frowned, but then slowly relaxed, thinking to himself, rather than being entangled with Qinsong, this can be considered a solution. On the surface, Lishan's sect hadn't leaned towards any side. Furthermore, there was no one from the heavenly grotto overseeing the sect. Even if this treasure fell into their hands, it wouldn't be a threat to any side. Moreover, this way, the open conflict would turn into a secret fight, and they could think of a way to rope them into their own side. As for whether this was a secret agreement between Lishan's sect and Qinsong school, it wasn't impossible. But in his opinion, this was also simple. They could make some harsh agreements to ensure that Lishan's sect couldn't be used by Qinsong. Thus, he said, "Spiritual Master Wu is right. We are all of Xian men, so we should support each other. However, this isn't a small matter. Lishan's sect doesn't have any friends here today, so it isn't good to make a decision for them. Why don't we put this aside and discuss it another day?" Shen Baishuang thought about it and nodded, "Then let's do it this way." Since the 2 sects had come to an agreement, the others naturally wouldn't voice out their objections. In the end, this heavenly golden branch only had 1 leaf left, and it was more threatening than practical. As for growing another leaf after 10,000 years, the 3 major sects had only been around for a little over 10,000 years. With that much time, they would have long ago found a way to refine a more powerful and suitable Dharma treasure. The most important thing was that there was another treasure here, and just now, it could be considered an important treasure. Spiritual Master Xian bowed and said, "Since this item has been decided, why don't we decide who the remaining treasure belongs to?" When enlightened Master Wen saw everyone looking at him, he said, "Fellow Taoists, please follow me." After he finished speaking, he boarded the carriage and headed in a certain direction. Everyone got on their chariots and followed. After traveling for several hours, a floating altar appeared in front of them. There were stairs on all 4 sides, and it was round on the outside and square on the inside, like a coin. In the middle of the altar, there was a beautiful painting floating in the air. The shaft was exposed, and it was dragged out for a few feet, floating in the air. On the surface of the painting, there were all sorts of stars. However, one moment it looked like this, and the next moment it looked different. It was constantly changing, as though it was showing the movement of the universe. This was the famous treasure of Honghe Monastery, the splendid painting of Zhikong. Although Zhu Jin had heard of it, he didn't know its specific uses. According to rumors, it could activate the heaven and earth Weili. However, even when Honghe Monastery was on the verge of destruction, they never used this treasure, and no one knew why. This time, Wu Fenggu didn't decline and took the initiative to say, "I heard that this treasure is very powerful, and we can't just leave it to others. How about this, for 100 years, the 9 sects of Xian men will take turns to control it." Wu Zhenren snorted and said, "Then which sect will take first?" Wu Fenggu said seriously, "This item was found first by the primordial Yang sect. According to reason, the primordial Yang sect will naturally take charge of it first." Wu Zhenren snorted, and his eyes were filled with disdain. It was said that they would take turns to control it, but how could it really be done? They could just find an excuse to delay it. This was clearly an agreement between Yu Xiao and primordial Yang. Once the treasure fell into their hands, they would never be able to get it out again. Moreover, in a few decades, the Qinsang school would launch the human tribulation. What was the difference between giving it to the other party at this time and giving it to them? At that moment, Yu Shirong waved her hand and took the golden map over. She then threw it into the sachet and said, "Since it's the turn of the sects, let's leave the 100-year-old one in the Shaoqing sect." After she finished speaking, she threw it into the sachet. Zhenren Wen saw that she didn't act according to common sense at all and immediately messed up his own plan. She couldn't help but be slightly angry and said, "Zhenren Lu, doesn't your sect always ask for the way of the sword? Why do you want to take such a treasure?" Yu Shirong glanced at her, as if she was a little confused about why she asked this question, so she replied seriously, "No reason. I just see that this painting is exquisite and I like it very much. It can be used to decorate the cave. After 100 years, I think I'll get tired of looking at it. At that time, you can take it, I won't fight with you." To be continued. Chapter 1162. Shen Baishuang sneered. Just now, when Lu Shirong attacked, Perfected One had clearly seen it. If she thought that it was inappropriate, she could have stopped her at that time. Why would she say anything later? But not only her, even the Perfected Ones did not come forward to stop her. The reason was that when Perfected Lu came just now, his act of killing the people from the Devil's sect had caused everyone present to either fear or respect him. They were unwilling to fight with him. Perfected One also knew that if she continued to chase after him, she would most likely have a sword battle with this Shaoqing female cultivator to determine the result. She gritted her teeth, but there was nothing she could do. She could not help but glance at Wu Fenggu. Although the Yuan Yang sect had its own plan, and didn't want to join the Jade Cloud sect's boat so easily, but if they didn't rely on the Jade Cloud sect, it would be hard for them to gain any advantage in front of this Master Lu+++. Wu Fenggu was much more cautious this time. He did not speak immediately, but looked at Perfected Lu, as if trying to determine her true intentions. Although the Yuxiao sect had always suspected that the Shaoqing sect and the Qinsang were close, Master Lingye was in charge of this matter. He did not want to offend the Shaoqing sect when he was uncertain. However, he was a little regretful at this moment. The Shaoqing sect had always kept their word and disdained to deny it. If they said that they would return after 100 years, they would definitely return. Just now, he had set the time limit a little too long. He pondered for a moment and transmitted his voice, "Zhenren Wen, since Zhenren Lu has the Zhikong painting in her hands, she would never take it out unless there's a sword duel. Perhaps this is her motive. However, there's still room for negotiation. We can sign a contract with her later. 100 years later, we'll definitely return the treasure to your sect." Perfected One sneered in her heart, but she did not believe him. It would be fine if they could get the Zhikong painting, but it was 100 years later. Yu Xiao was doing them a favor now. If they accepted it, wouldn't they be tied up for 100 years? Moreover, no matter what, the longer it was delayed, the more variables there would be. Who knew what would happen then? Wu Fenggu did not look at her, he only clasped his hands towards the distance. He said, Jinren, since you've taken a liking to this treasure, we don't have to fight for it anymore. But since we've agreed that each family will be in charge for 100 years, we'll have to make a contract. What do you think? Lu Shirong thought about it and said, if I don't do it, will I not be able to take this treasure map away? Wu Fenggu hastily said, Reverend's words are too serious. It's not that we don't trust your esteemed sect, it's just that our fellow Taoists and I were sent here by the sect. Now that the matter has been settled, we must return with an explanation. Although the rules of each sect are different, empty words ultimately do not have much persuasive power. I hope you can understand our difficulties. Lu Shirong said, you, the Reverend, speak very strangely. I'll do it. Why do I need to be considerate of you? Wu Fenggu coughed. He had to be careful when speaking to this enlightened being. He was afraid that he would say something wrong and put himself in a difficult position. At this moment, he could only say against his will, Jinren Lu is indeed reasonable. Shen Baishuang interrupted, Jinren Wu, about the contract, we can postpone it for a few more days. When the fellow Taoists from Lishan sect arrive, the ownership of the two treasures will be decided. Fellow Taoists can also be witnesses. Wu Fenggu agreed, you're right, Jinren Shen. We're all here with our avatars, we won't delay anything. How about we discuss it in a few days? Everyone agreed. Seeing that there was nothing else, they were about to leave when Tan Dingxian suddenly raised his head and said loudly, everyone, please stay here for a while. I have something to say. Everyone was surprised. Jinren Shi and Xian looked at Wu Fenggu and saw that he was expressionless. They pondered for a moment and stood still. Shen Baishuang looked at them and did not move. Tan Dingxian looked around and cupped his hands. He said solemnly, fellow Taoists, the spiritual vigor of the 9 continents has greatly declined. If we allow this border pass to continue absorbing spiritual vigor, it will not be a good thing for us Taoists. Jinren Wen suddenly had a bad feeling. Sect leader Tan said, we are here for the treasures of Honghe School. Since these 2 items have already been taken over by someone else, we can take them out first. Later on, we will destroy this small world so that the spiritual vigor of this place can be returned to the 9 continents. When Jinren Wen heard this, he frowned. It was obvious that this small world was left behind by Honghe sect to revive the sect. Although the 2 sect-guarding treasures in the world were now taken, there must be many treasures left in the world. It was just that they did not have the time to search for them in the past 2 days. This time, because of Shaoqing and Qinsang's obstruction, Yuanyang sect did not get any benefits. She still hoped that this small world could make up for it a little, how could she bear to abandon it? She took a breath and said, Sect leader Tan, I know that the spiritual vigor is declining, but why are you in such a hurry? Can't we delay it for some time? However, sect leader Tan did not relent at all. He said righteously, 1 more day of delay means 1 more portion of spiritual vigor in the 9 continents. For the sake of the world, I hope your sect will not delay and take action as soon as possible. Jinren Wen was annoyed. What for the spiritual vigor of the 9 continents? It was just a nice way to put it. If there was a sect in the world that did not take this seriously, it would be Qinsang School, which had a total of 14 enlightened masters. But even so, Butian Pavilion did not dare to find trouble with them. Why did they have to make things difficult for Yuanyang sect? She wanted to call for help, but when she looked around, she saw that everyone looked indifferent, as if this matter did not concern them. Unexpectedly, no one was willing to speak up for Yuanyang sect. She could not help but feel her heart sink. She suddenly realized that Yuanyang sect was outside of the other sections. Although it was aloof, once it was involved in any trouble, no one would help it. It could be said that it was alone. Tan Dingxian saw that she did not speak, so he continued, since Jinren Wen is not speaking, I will take it that you have agreed. This time, I have brought a realm-breaking treasure, so there is no need for your sect to take action. Then he bowed to everyone and said, please leave this world. If I have offended you in any way, I hope you will forgive me. Seeing that he was not just talking and was really going to take action, Jinren Wu hurriedly said, Sect leader Tan, please wait. The heavenly golden branch and the vine are still in this world. Tan Dingxian immediately said, that is simple. Jinren sure has to take the vine anyway. Why don't you take it out now? When Li Mountain sect arrives, you can give it to them. Shen Baishuang watched with cold eyes. He did not speak, and Jinren Wu and Jinren Pang were also silent. The matter in front of them had nothing to do with them, so naturally, they would not go against Yu Xiao's side. Jinren Wen had no choice but to send a message to Wu Fenggu. Jinren Wu, this small world is useful for my Yuanyang sect. Can you put in a few words for me? I will remember this favor. Wu Fenggu nodded at her and said, Sect leader Tan, all the fellow Taoists are here. Why do you have to chase them away? As long as we break this small world, the spiritual vigor that we've swallowed over the past few days can still be returned. It's not a big deal to delay for a while. Tan Dingxian looked troubled, as if she was struggling. Finally, she sighed heavily and said, all right. Once the contract is signed, we must break this small world. Shen Baishuang said, since there is nothing else, I will take my leave. He bowed and left the pagoda. As he moved, the Jinren of the sects also left. In the end, only Wu Fenggu, Jinren Wen, and Jinren Wu were still standing there. Jinren Wen came up and bowed deeply, thank you, Jinren Wu, for helping us out. The two of us thank you. Wu Fenggu smiled and said, Jinren Wu, there is no need to be resentful. If I say that I am willing to make a bet with Jinren Shaoqinglu, if I win by luck and get the Jikong map back, will your sect form an alliance with us? Jinren Wen and Jinren Wu were stunned, but they could not answer. Wu Fenggu looked at them and said, do you think I, Yu Xiao, do not know what your sect is thinking? Today, I am here not to ask for your sect to join Yu Xiao immediately, but to let your sect see my sincerity. He raised his sleeves and cupped his hands, saying, anyway, there is still a long way to go. The two of you, farewell. When he finished, he stepped onto the cloud raft and left. Jinren Wu looked at the cloud raft and said, Senior Martial Sister, this Jinren Wu's way of doing things is very different from the cultivators of Zhou sect. Jinren Wen sighed and said, it's a pity that Wu Ruyang, Jinren Wu, is dead. Wu's words in Yu Xiao sect are getting weaker and weaker. She lowered her head and thought for a while, then said, Junior Martial Sister, if there is a war between Qinsang School and Yu Xiao School, who do you think has a higher chance of winning? Jinren Wu thought for a while and said, I can't say for sure. Although there are only 2 sects on good terms with Qinsang School, there are 14 Jinren in each sect. What's more, Jinren Zhang tore up the contract at PG Palace, so there might be more in the future. In fact, I have a higher chance of winning. On the surface, it looks like we are evenly matched. Jinren Wen nodded and said, that's right. With Yuanyang sect's current strength, whichever sect we join will have a higher chance of winning. That's why they are forcing me to join them. Jinren Wu said, but didn't sect head's senior martial brother say that this is not the right time? We can't see what the 2 sects are planning. If we join them rashly, it will be hard to turn back if we make the wrong move. Jinren Wen shook his head and said, I used to think the same way. I thought Yuanyang only needed to be impartial, so I could defend myself. But today, I deeply feel that Yuanyang is like a boat on a stormy sea, and there are only 2 ways in front of us. If you don't choose, one mistake and the boat will be destroyed, and you will be overturned. Wu Fenggu had returned to the place where the Dharma carriage was originally parked. Seeing that sect head Tan was already waiting for him, he invited him to sit on the cloud raft and said, this time I have to thank sect head Tan. Tan Dingxian said, don't mention it. If it weren't for Yu Xiao's help, Butian Pavilion would have fallen to the ground long ago. These small things are not worth mentioning. She paused and then asked, do you want to pressure him a little more? Wu Fenggu shook his head and said with a smile, no need. Pressing him too much is not appropriate. I believe that after this incident, Yuanyang sect will understand that if you wander around on both sides, you will end up with nothing. Right now, he still has a choice. That's because Qinsang School and I can still tolerate him. If one day we can't tolerate him anymore, then we will have to make the decision for him. Chapter 1163. When Li Mountain learned that the Zenrins of the various sects had assigned a treasure to their sect, sect master Shen Zixin had to stop her seclusion and personally went to receive the treasure. A few days later, she entered the small world pass. There were no setbacks during this trip. She successfully obtained the treasure and made an agreement with the Zenrins of the various sections. Li Mountain sect could only use the treasure to defend the mountain gate. Regardless of the situation in the future, it could not be used against the Xian men. If there was a need, and the various sects agreed, they could request for her to use the treasure against the enemy. Under normal circumstances, no sect would allow their sect's treasure to be restricted like this. However, Li Mountain sect did not have a Dong Tianjinren, so they did not have much confidence. Having a treasure to defend the mountain gate was already good enough. Therefore, they could only agree. Returning to the flower boat, Shen Zixin did not show any joy. The disciple who followed her this time was her second disciple, Han Yunxia. Having followed her for hundreds of years, she was very familiar with her master's temperament. Sensing her heavy heart, she asked carefully, "Master, is it not good to bring the treasure this time?" Shen Zixin sighed and said, "The reason why I didn't go earlier was because the Li Mountain sect is not able to control such a treasure. I wanted to avoid it, but the more I avoided it, the more it came to me. Since all the sects have agreed, I have no choice but to accept it. However, I heard that the people from the demon sect were killed by Jinren Shaoqing Lu outside. They may not be satisfied. If they hear that Li Mountain sect has returned with the treasure, they will most likely try to kill us." Han Yunxia's face turned pale. Then the person who insisted on giving the treasure to Li Mountain sect, is he trying to harm me? Shen Zixin shook her head. "Based on what I know, the person who suggested this is Jinren Wu of Pingdu sect. I believe that this is the intention of Jinren Shin of Qinsang school. This Jinren has no good intentions towards me, nor does he have evil intentions. His goal is to prevent Yuan Yang or Yu Xiao from obtaining the treasure." Han Yunxia panicked. Then why not ask for Jinren Shin's help? Shen Zixin shook her head. It wasn't easy to ask for help. She was the sect leader now. As the sect master, no matter which sect she went to, it would give others the impression that she was leaning towards one side. Li Mountain sect was now struggling to survive in the cracks. The crux was that they did not have enough power and influence. How can other sects value you? Deep in her heart, she was actually leaning towards Qinsang school. Firstly, it was because of the instructions given by the Yuling patriarch before his ascension. Secondly, it was because Yu Xiao school prioritized profit. Even if she were to side with them now, she was afraid that she would only be used. Once they had lost their value, they would be kicked away. After some consideration, she said, "I've decided. I won't ask for a single family." "What?" Han Yunxia was shocked. She thought for a moment and said, "Master, why don't we ask Jinren Wei to come and escort us? He is a disciple of Jinren Zhang of Qinsang school. With him, the cultivators of the devil's sect will not dare to attack us." Shen Zi was tempted. However, he soon discarded this thought and said resolutely, "No, there's no need for that. I, Mount Li, will not return to beg anyone." Han Yunxia said anxiously, "Master." Shen Zixin raised her hand and stopped her from speaking again. "All right, go and cultivate. We'll return to the mountain tomorrow." Han Yunxia had no choice but to bow and say yes. Shen Zixin first wrote a letter and sent it to the mountain gate. She ordered that no one should leave the mountain no matter what. Everything would be handled after she returned. She then took out the Divine Beauty golden branch. She touched the flowers and leaves on it and carefully sensed it for a moment. She shook her head and put it back. This golden branch could be refined even by cultivators who had just entered the path of Tao. However, the time needed was different. Jinren Dongtian only needed 2 to 4 hours. For cultivators like her who were yuanying, it would take at least several months or even years. Unfortunately, one more day, this small world would be broken. Otherwise, she could have stayed here and refined the golden branch before bringing it back. On the second day, she boarded the flower boat and left the small world, returning to the mountain gate. At the same time, Jinren Exayan and Jinren Shi hid in the clouds and watched her leave. Jinren Shi said, "The devil's sect did not succeed this time. They will not be satisfied. On the way back from Mount Li, they will definitely be coveted. Once the people of the devil's sect succeed, fellow Daoist and I can go and snatch it back." Jinren Exayan said, "Even if we take it back, according to the contract, it should be returned to Mount Li. Then what's the use of this? Are you thinking of selling a favor to Mount Li sect? Right now, they don't even have a grotto heaven cultivator. They say they are on the same level as us, but they are only relying on the Jade Tomb Patriarch. They are not worthy of being roped in by us." Jinren Shi smiled. "It should be returned. However, if Sect Master Shen is injured and there is no one to support the sect, how can we protect this treasure? As fellow Taoists, we should help guard it for a few days to prevent it from being taken by the devil sect. Isn't this what we should do?" Jinren Exayan did not agree immediately. Instead, he asked, "Does Jinren Wu know what you are doing?" Jinren Shi shook his head. "Jinren Wu doesn't know." Jinren Exayan took a step back. He bowed and said, "Then forgive me for not being able to travel with you. However, with your ability, I believe you can defeat the invaders from the devil's sect." It was not that he cared about Wu Fenggu's opinion. Instead, he thought that even if he succeeded, it would only benefit Taihao School. It would not benefit Nanhua sect at all. There was no need for him to worry about it. Huang Yugong was good friends with this Jinren Shi, but he was not. He was even wary of this person. Jinren Shi laughed. He pointed to the south and said, "Hold on, Daoist friend. Although I did not receive Jinren Wu's order this time, I was entrusted by someone else." Jinren Exayan's heart skipped a beat. He asked, "Who?" Jinren Shi said meaningfully, "The family that is in charge of Yuxiao is not Wu." After deciding on the ownership of the two treasures, he immediately wrote a letter to Yuxiao sect. This was because he knew that the matter of Yuxiao would still be decided by Zhou. As for Wu, she could be respectful on the surface, but she did not need to take it too seriously. As expected, Zhou replied to him that day. She politely asked him to escort the people from Lishan sect back to the mountain so that the treasures of Xianmen would not be taken away by the devil sect. After Daoist Exayan knew that this matter was under the care of Yuxiao sect, his attitude changed instantly. He no longer insisted on his own opinion. He said, "If this is the case, I will go with you." Shen Zixin had only left for half a day when she suddenly heard a collapsing sound behind her. She lifted the curtain and turned around to take a look. She saw that the spiritual light of the small world in the sky had been broken. An immeasurable amount of spiritual vigor had dispersed into heaven and earth. She was closer to it. She felt like her Dharmakaya was bathed in the rain and her spirit was refreshed. However, at this moment, she became even more vigilant. With the spiritual vigor in chaos, it would be the right time for someone to attack. She shouted, "Disciples, look after the prohibition. Do not be distracted." She was not wrong. Not long after she looked after the prohibition, the entire flower boat shook violently as though it had crashed into a layer of black fog. It continuously eroded the prohibition in all directions. Before this, there were no signs at all. At this moment, she was still calm. This flower boat was personally refined by Jinren Yuling back then. The people of Dongtian would not be able to withstand it. If it was just a clone, they could still handle it. After a moment, the other party seemed to have realized that if this continued, even if they used a few days of effort, they would not be able to break the barrier outside the flower boat. Hence, they stopped. The black fog disappeared completely in an instant. Shen Zixin was still vigilant. She did not believe that the other party would give up so easily. There should be a backup plan. However, unexpectedly, the other party did not appear for the next 2 days. It was as though he had really left. At this moment, she realized that something was wrong. Logically, they should not have reached the mountain gate yet. The scenery of Lishan Mountain, the cloud pool, and the ocean of Qi should be visible from here. However, when she looked over, she did not see anything. She pondered in her heart and exclaimed, "Not good." The group of them should have fallen into some kind of illusion. The other party should have never left. Instead, he was always at the side and only changed his attack method. After all, the prohibition was a dead object. It could only be used to defend against a single attack. However, there were many methods that cultivators could use. For example, the maze barrier in front of her. She knew that Yuanming's sect had a technique that allowed thousands of years to pass in the illusion formation. If she could not find a way to break out of it, she would be trapped here until she died. The other party did not even need to meet her face to face. He could easily deal with her. She gritted her teeth and took out a talisman from her pouch. She said, "Let's see if the sects will allow my treasure to fall into the hands of the devil sect. If not, then I can only use this item to break out." At this moment, the entire heaven and earth shook and shattered like glass. The world in front of her seemed to have shed a layer of filth and revealed its original color. She revealed a surprised expression and couldn't help but stand up. "May I know which fellow Taoist is helping me?" A female Taoist appeared in the sky and greeted, "Sect Master Shen, are you all right?" Shen Zixin said happily, "So it's Spiritual Master Pang." She curtsied and thanked him. "Thank you for saving me, Spiritual Master. If you don't mind, please come in and have a seat." Spiritual Master Pang said, "That's what I was thinking." Before entering the flower boat, she glanced at the sky casually. There were originally 2 flying rainbows there, but after Shen Zixin was rescued, they disappeared. After inviting Spiritual Master Pang to sit in the cabin, Shen Zixin hesitated and asked, "Spiritual Master, are you passing by or are you here to help us?" Spiritual Master Pang smiled and said, "I know what Sect Master Shen is worried about. Don't worry, I'm not here because someone asked me to. I'm only here because of the friendship between our 3 sections." Friendship between our 3 sects. Shen Zixin sighed and immediately stood up. She said seriously, "Spiritual Master, please accept another bow from me." Spiritual Master Pang sat down and accepted her bow before saying, "Spiritual Master Pang, I also know that your sect is in a difficult situation right now. It's not convenient for you to join any side, but the situation is the same as before. This is not a long-term solution. Look at how powerful the Yuanyang sect is, second only to the 3 sects." This time, they were almost forced into a corner by Butian Pavilion. Shen Zixin knew that he had something else to say, so she bowed and said, "Spiritual Master, please give me some pointers." Spiritual Master Pang said, "I have a plan that satisfies both sides. You don't need to join any side. As long as Anata Temple, Pingdu sect, and your Mountly establish an alliance and restore the reputation of the 3 sects in the west, your sect will be safe." Shen Zixin's eyes brightened. Back then, the 3 sects united to fight against the enemy because they were all weak. However, each sect's situation and way of doing things were different, so they did not establish an alliance. After Spiritual Master Yuling passed away, he naturally did not mention it again. If the 3 Western sects formed an alliance in name, they would not be considered to have joined the Black Tsang sect. In fact, they would be under the protection of the Black Tsang sect, and they would still be able to make their own decisions. This was indeed the most beneficial method for Mountly at present. After she ascended to the position of sect leader, to be honest, she also had such an idea. However, any interaction between sects required strength that matched one's strength. However, there was no Taoist master Dongtian in charge of the sect, so everything was just empty talk. Now that Taoist Master Pang took the initiative to propose it, and it might even be the instruction of the Dark Azure sect, why would she hesitate? She immediately said, "Zixin understands. Then please set a time, sect leaders. When the time comes, you only need to send a message, and Zixin will definitely come." To be continued. Chapter 1164. After Shinzixin returned to the mountain with the talisman, she made an alliance with Pingdu and Huanjin on the White Jade platform in less than a month. From then on, the three schools in the west would protect each other. If any school encountered an enemy, the other two would come to their rescue. Soon, everyone knew about this. In the future, it would be hard for these two schools to avoid going against Mount Li. However, these two schools were allies of Qinsang School. Although Mount Li did not lean towards Qinsang School, it was under their protection. After Wu Fenggu returned and heard about this, he said to the disciple beside him, "Previously, I wanted to escort the people from Li Shan's sect back to the mountain gate, at least to let them know the goodwill of Jade Cloud's sect. However, the sect had other plans, so I could only not move. Now that the three sects in the west have formed an alliance, even if Li Shan is not a pawn of Lin Song, those two sects will not let them near Jade Cloud's sect." The disciple asked curiously, "After Jinren Yuling ascended, only the spiritual cave in Mount Li is worth people's attention. There is nothing left. Is Master too concerned about it?" Wu Fenggu said, "Although Yuling has ascended, Mount Li is her life's work. She must have left behind some means to protect the school. Right now, Lan Song and I are trying to recruit allies from all over the place. The reason for this is to increase the number of chips in our hands as much as possible so that we have a better chance of victory in battle. At a time like this, we can't give up on anything that can be of help." The disciple said, "Then why didn't Master tell the school?" Wu Fenggu mocked himself, "If my words carry enough weight, I won't have to worry about these matters. Moreover, this can only be done and not said. Otherwise, I won't praise you if you're right and blame you if you're wrong." The disciple hesitated. He wanted to speak but stopped. Wu Fenggu did not need to think too much. He knew what he was thinking. He said, "Are you wondering why the Wu family did not establish another school and insisted on being in charge of the same school as the Zhou family?" The disciple kowtowed and said, "I dare not." Wu Fenggu said casually, "You don't have to hide it. I had the same thoughts as you when I was young. However, when you become the Jinren, you won't think like this." In the early years, the Zhou clan and the Wu clan had joined forces. Only then were they able to defeat all the outsiders one by one. In this way, the Zhou clan continued to grow stronger, and the Wu clan similarly gained many benefits. Not to mention the fact that the two clans had established a contract for generations, there were also many marriages between them. You and me, I and you, until now. They were already inseparable. Moreover, the Wu clan had never thought of suppressing the Zhou clan. They were willing to take a lower position. The Wu clan's Grotto Heaven's offerings had always been the same as the Zhou clan's Shinran. There was no difference between the two. Other than the younger generation who needed to take care of some mundane affairs, the older generation would still be respected by the Zhou clan. How could he be so satisfied? However, the people of the Grotto Heaven didn't take any action, and the disciples were dissatisfied. It was completely useless. The disciple only said, "This disciple will only listen to Master." Wu Fenggu grunted and said, "You don't need to understand the reason behind it. You only need to know that if Yuxiao perishes, then my Wu clan will perish. If Yuxiao perishes, then my Wu clan will perish." Blood Soul Sect, Ancient Spring Stage. Enlightened Being Wen was playing chess with Gong Liangchu of the Netherworld Spring Sect's Paradise. After he put down a chess piece, he asked with a smile, "Fellow Taoist, Gong Liangchu's clone was destroyed by Yu Shirong this time. Are you just going to endure it?" Gong Liangchu did not look annoyed at all. He put down a chess piece and said, "Senior brother Yuan from my sect often says that we should endure it first. We can plan for great things in the future. The internal strife of the celestial sect is not far away. Why should we care about the moment of anger? One day, we can make them pay back." There had long been a consensus among the various sects of the Devil's Sect that the Qinsang and Yuxiao would make a move sooner or later. There had been many battles in the Celestial Sect over the past tens of thousands of years. However, it was different this time. If the two sects were to fight, it would definitely be a great battle that would sweep through the Celestial Sect. After this battle, it was very likely that there would be two results. One was that both sects would suffer heavy losses, and the power of the celestial sect would definitely decline. The other was that one of the sects would be destroyed, and the other would suffer heavy losses. No matter which result it would give the spiritual sect a chance to rise. In the face of such a situation, most of the people in the Devil's sect thought that they needed to stay calm and observe the situation. When the situation became better, they would then choose the right time to make a move. After all, the spiritual sect had been here for tens of thousands of years. They did not mind waiting a little longer. Moreover, the Jade Cliff could suppress the continent. No matter how they fought, at least the Donghua continent would not be destroyed. Jinren smiled and said, waiting for the right time to make a move is a good idea. I am just afraid that the situation may not change as I wish. Gong Liangchu cupped his hands and said, Jinren predictions have always been accurate. I would like to hear your wise opinion. Wen Qingxiang said, it is not a wise opinion. These two sects have been planning for a long time. Although I do not know what their goal is, before they make a move, they will not allow the spiritual sect to watch from the side. Who knows, they might have a way to drag us into the swamp together. Gong Liangchu said, Jinren's words are very clear. But even if the spiritual sect knows, what can we do? Do we have to make a move first? To put it bluntly, the Devil's sect had been suppressed for tens of thousands of years. Their foundation and potential were far inferior to the celestial sect. Even if they borrowed some of the power of heaven and earth during the demonic calamity, they were still at a disadvantage. There were some things that they could not do even if they wanted to. Jinren said, actually, there is a risky way. Gong Liangchu was interested and said, Jinren, why don't you tell me about it? Rest assured, once it enters my ears, no one else will hear it. Jinren smiled and said, there is nothing that cannot be said to others. I am not afraid that someone will hear it. He put down the chess piece and straightened his body. His eyes flashed as he said, what I mean is, if the Qinsong and Yuxiao clans fight, why don't the 6 sects of the spiritual sect join forces and destroy Shaoqing? Destroy Shaoqing? Gong Liangchu was shocked. His movement stopped and the chess piece in his hand could no longer move. He said in shock, Jinren, let's not talk about the fact that the Shaoqing sect is not to be trifled with. Aren't you afraid that the celestial sect will turn around and attack you? Jinren smiled and said, how can that be? If the Qinsong and Yuxiao clans fight, Shaoqing will stay out of it. If I fight with him, wouldn't it be in line with the intentions of the two sects? If Shaoqing has an alliance with one of the sects, then when we attack him, the sect that is not his ally will definitely delay the other sect. Gong Liangchu crushed the chess piece and asked, what about the benefits? Even if I fight with Shaoqing, what is the benefit? Wen Qingxiang looked at him and said in a deep voice, if the spiritual sect wants to grow stronger, then we must find a way to suppress the celestial sect. Just like what the celestial sect has done to me for the past 10,000 years. If I attack Shaoqing while the Qinsong and Yuxiao clans are fighting, then I only have to face one sect. But if the two sects stop fighting, then I will have to face the remaining forces of Shaoqing and Celestial sect. You can tell which is easier and which is more difficult. Gong Liangchu did not speak for a long time. After a while, he said, what if the Jinren is wrong? Wen Qingxiang said, that's fine. With the protection of Mingyi from the Netherworld Spring sect, and the Celestial sect needs me to suppress the Genin demon, will they destroy the spiritual sect? How bad will the situation be? Gong Liangchu thought carefully and shook his head, Shaoqing is not easy to fight. Even if we can destroy this sect, we will suffer heavy casualties. It's better to sit back and do nothing. Wen Qingxiang stared at him and said, to achieve great things, there is always a price to pay. As long as we plan carefully, we may be able to reduce the losses. But if we don't do it, we will only miss opportunities again and again, and then lament our bad luck. Gong Liangchu sat and thought for a long time before saying, Jinren invited me to play chess today for this matter. No wonder you asked me about the slaying of my doppelganger. Jinren's words make some sense. I will discuss it with the headmaster later. When Qingxiang smiled and said, "What is fellow Taoist Gong Liangchu going to say?" Gong Liangchu said without hesitation, "Of course I will tell you the truth." At this point, his expression changed. "Jinren, do you have any other advice?" When Qingxiang leaned forward and said, "My friend, you can tell Zhang's school that although it is not necessary to fight with Shaoqing, it is always good to be prepared. In this way, if you really want to attack, you will not be in a hurry." "My friend, you are not wrong." Gong Liangchu looked at him and thought for a while. He sighed. "Jinren, you have put in a lot of effort." Jinren Wen said, "My friend, you are too serious. But I think, rather than being forced into the trap by the two sects, it is better to find a way to break out of it." After the destruction of the Honghe small world, the Donghua continent returned to its usual silence. In the blink of an eye, another 20 years had passed. In the Tianqing Hall, Zhang Yan stood in front of the stairs with his sleeves behind his back, looking at the intercept demon that was floating with the wind. As the demon grew bigger and bigger, the hall could no longer accommodate its leaping and turning. In order to not lose its ferocity, he would let it out every once in a while to stretch its body. Now that it was in the sky, the radius of a few miles outside the hall was almost completely covered by it. However, this was because the demon had not stretched out its full strength. Otherwise, it would not be a problem for it to cover half of the Tianqing continent. After flying in the air for a long time, the intercept demon seemed to feel tired. It let out an ear-piercing screech and landed on the ground. As its body was flat, it looked like there was a layer of thick, bright-colored fur in front of it. Zhang Yan felt a desire to get close to him. He shook his sleeves, and the lake in front of the hall churned. Immediately, a large fish that was a mile long was pulled up by his mana. When the segmented demon saw the fish, he seemed to be excited. Without waiting for the fish to struggle back into the water, he opened his body and covered the fish's body. It was as though he was wrapping the fish tightly from head to tail. After all, it was refined from the remains of a heavenly demon. Even though it was so big, it still maintained its habit of devouring blood. However, it was not like 10,000 years ago. There were no more big demons for it to devour. Therefore, Zhang Yan sent a clone to the North Sea to catch many mutants and threw them into the lake in the hall. After eating such a big fish, it could ensure that it would not move for 100 days. In just a few dozen breaths, the intercept demon's body gradually shrunk. In the end, it stopped changing when it was about 1,000 feet long. Zhang Yan pondered for a while. Previously, he had used the Qinghong sword pill to test its body. This time, it was different from before. He needed to use force to break through that layer of fur. This kind of body was actually tough enough, but he was still not satisfied. He pondered, if this continues according to plan, this demon will need at least another 10 years to truly grow. However, the surging of the earth chi is becoming more and more intense. I don't know when the various sects will notice it. I can't wait any longer. Why don't I move it out of the Tianqing Hall and throw it into the North Sea? Let it devour living things and supplement it with medicinal stones so that I can use it as soon as possible. To be continued. Chapter 1165. A few days later, Zhang Yan created a clone and sent the segmented demon to the North Sea. He had refined the segmented demon using the living refinement technique, so they were connected. If he wanted to summon it back, he only needed to think about it, so he wasn't afraid that it would escape. Thus, after throwing it there, he threw in enough medicinal stones to last for 10 years and didn't pay any more attention to it. His true body and Dharma body sat in the Hall of Crossing Truth and used the abyssal heavy water to cultivate day and night. He didn't care about anything else. 3 years passed while he was in seclusion. The abyssal heavy water that surrounded him was slowly pushed away and floated up, turning into a spiral wave that flew into the sky. Under his control, the water split up and turned into countless water droplets that floated around his body. At first glance, this water was similar to the Xianming heavy water, but its weight was far greater. As a result, he expended quite a bit of effort to slightly refine the Xianming heavy water. Now, not only did the two of them look almost the same from the outside, even if a cultivator were to sense it, it would be difficult for them to detect any flaws in their haste. Those who knew about this method of his would inevitably suffer a great loss if they still followed the method he had prepared beforehand to break it. He raised his hand and pointed. The heavy water gathered at one spot and obediently returned to the soil platform. Then, he stabilized his chi dynamic and examined his dharmakaya. He noticed that his dharmakaya had improved tremendously in this closed-door cultivation compared to when he was at the 6th barrier stage. Now that he had accumulated enough, if he didn't think of a way to break the thick wall above him, he wouldn't be able to continue moving forward no matter how much he cultivated. It was like how a pond could only have so much water, but when it rained, it would overflow. Only by expanding it and turning it into a vast lake could it contain more water. In reality, his foundation was deep enough. He could have tried to break the barrier thousands of years ago, and at the same time, he was more than half confident. However, he knew that he had a long road ahead of him, and he couldn't be greedy. The more he accumulated, the smoother his path would be. Thus, he suppressed his momentum and waited for his magic power to rise to the point where it couldn't advance any further. Just now was the time. Now, the time had come. He no longer hesitated. With a slight tug of his mind, boundless Xian Qi emerged from nothingness. Not long after, it enveloped the entire Xuanzi ocean realm. For a moment, thunder and lightning resounded throughout the realm. The formation spirit sensed the boundless energy and immediately knew what had happened. He hurriedly activated all the formations in the small world and ordered the 4 directions mages to guard every formation pillar. Because he had experienced the same thing the last time, this time he did it in an orderly manner. The surrounding sea was only slightly shaken before it calmed down again. At the same time, Ning Chengxian, who was cultivating in the side hall, also sensed something and looked up. After a while, he pondered for a while. Just now, he withdrew his gaze and went back to meditating. Many living beings in the lower realm thought that this change would be the same as the last time, and that it would pass very quickly. Who knew that the profound energy in the sky would not disperse for a long time, and it lingered for an entire 3 years. Finally, it disappeared, and thousands of miles of emptiness were revealed. Just now, those living beings dared to come out to forage for food. Fortunately, all the things in this realm were extraordinary. When they were not moving, they could nourish themselves with spiritual opportunity. Otherwise, they would have starved to death. On the platform in the main hall, strands of profound energy gathered and formed a dharmakaya. When Zhang Yan sat down again, he had already broken through the 7th barrier. It was different from the 6th heavenly barrier. It was not difficult to break through this barrier. There was not even the slightest obstruction. Everything seemed to be going smoothly. However, he was very clear. There was actually great danger hidden in this. After breaking through the barrier, his mana increased all the way. Moving forward, he could not stop for a long time. Hence, this round took an exceptionally long time. At that time, his entire body seemed to be pushed by a river, and there was no way for him to stop. If his strength was slightly lacking, the consequences would be unpredictable. He could feel that there was still a long way to go before he touched the real end. It was just the 7th barrier, and it was already like this. If he wanted to break through the barrier in the future, it would take even longer, and it would be even more dangerous. Naturally, he could stop now and cultivate the embryo to step into the 3rd realm. Then, there would be fewer twists and turns. However, ever since he stepped on the path of cultivation, he had to overcome all obstacles along the way. Even if there was no path ahead, he would find a way to open up a path. Why would he avoid danger? If he did not reach the real end, he would definitely not retreat. Now that he had cultivated to this stage, he had actually surpassed the limit of a normal cultivator. Normally speaking, as long as one had not cultivated the embryo, one would still be lacking compared to a 3rd realm cultivator. Just like a hidden dragon in a deep pond, even if its body was strong and it had all the scales and claws, it was still trapped in a corner. If it did not enter the sea, it would not be able to soar into the sky. However, he cultivated both qi and strength, and he had many techniques at his disposal. He was confident that when it came time to battle, even if he was up against someone of this generation, he would still be able to put up a good fight. After stabilizing his qi, he gazed at the deep abyss heavy water that filled the soil platform. With a thought, he easily guided it to the front of him, turning it into a stream that flowed in front of him. He thought to himself, this platform of bearing transformation and imperial earth is no longer sufficient for me. I can either borrow some from the upper extreme hall or the daylight hall and build an even more majestic one, or I can simply enter the grotto heaven to cultivate. Now that Huxian had not returned, the daylight hall had no one to manage it. Thinking about it, he could only borrow some from the upper extreme hall. Flicking his sleeve, he placed the heavy water back. Then, he pointed with his finger and a talisman book materialized. He then sent it to the upper extreme hall. After a while, he heard footsteps. It was Jingyu entering from the outside. Arriving in front of him, he handed over a letter and said in a low voice, "Master, spiritual master Zhao sent a letter." Zhang Yan's expression changed slightly. With a sweep of his gaze, the letter floated over and unfolded in front of him. The so-called spiritual master Zhao was Zhang Boyan's disciple, Zhao Yang. Everything this person learned came from the Nether Spring sect. Therefore, for a long time, he had been cultivating in the demonic sect's territory and acting as the eyes and ears of the Dujin Hall. Zhao Yang knew that the Nether Spring sect did not trust cultivators like him who had returned from outside. He was also afraid of revealing any flaws, so he accepted the task and went to a lower sect to guard it. Because he did not fight with anyone, no one came to control him. He had been secretly using various methods to try and understand the various arrangements of the Nether Spring sect. The content of the letter was that the demonic sect had been acting strangely recently. Actually, because of the confrontation between the Qinsang and Yuxiao clans, the 6 demonic sects had never stopped preparing. However, in the past, their arrangements were as smooth as flowing water. This time, it felt slightly rushed. Although it was not obvious, it made him feel a little strange. Zhao Yang knew that it was impossible for anything to change without reason, and there was usually a reason that pushed things from behind. Thus, he didn't take this lightly, and he wrote down his suspicions and judgment before sending it to the Truth Purification Hall. As for how the sect judged it and what they would do, it wasn't something he could worry about. Zhang Yan put down the letter and looked around. He asked, "Are there any letters from other places?" Jingyu said, "Yes, I have sorted them all out." He took out a wooden box from his sleeve and placed it firmly on the table. Zhang Yan opened it and looked through it one by one. Then, he revealed a look of contemplation. Using this as an inference and combining it with Zhao Yang's letter, he found that in the past few years, the 6 demonic sects had made some moves. They frequently asked for offerings from the lower sections. Therefore, he guessed that the demonic sects were targeting one of the sections. However, no matter what they did, the original plan of the Qinsang school would not have any changes. This was because long before the plan was made, sect leader Qin had already considered all the powers. Therefore, whether they made a move or not, there would not be any hindrance. At this moment, he flicked his finger and a sword beam flew out of the small world. It landed in the direction of the great pool of Dragon Abyss and quickly entered the crevice of the 9 Returns pillar. After a brief investigation, he thought to himself, the qi of the earth is surging non-stop. It is more than 100 times stronger than before. Even with the restriction lock, there are signs of leakage. I'm afraid that there will be movement at the boundary setting needle very soon. At that time, the sects will know that someone is excavating the earth's roots. It seems that there is not much time left. He sensed again, but it was to observe the changes of the segmented demon. In the past few years, the demon had been foraging for food and cultivating in the North Sea. It was very happy. However, its body had also become bigger, occupying a radius of 100 miles. At this moment, it was floating across the sea, chasing after a strange white-back fish with 10,000 tentacles on its belly. As if it felt Zhang Yan's attention, it trembled and gave up on the food that was about to reach its mouth. It shrunk on the spot and did not move. Zhang Yan pondered and said, "This demon is like a fish in water here. Looking at the situation, its potential has not been exhausted. That's good, I'll let it stay here for now. When the tribulation begins, I'll call it back." Currently, he had prepared many methods for the human tribulation, but the heaven and earth leaf was the only one that he had not completed. Although he lacked this item, he was confident that he could still fight against Zhu Zhen with his rank 5 strength path body and the treasured clothing worn by the past hall masters of Duzhen. However, this was still one less defensive method than what he had planned. Fortunately, a long time ago, he had imagined that he might not be able to refine this treasure. If that was really the case, he only needed to make a small change in his tactics. Just as he was thinking about it, he felt a sensation in his heart. When he checked, it was the consciousness transmitted by the heaven and earth leaf. That feeling was like a fetus in an egg that was eagerly waiting to come out, but it was still unable to struggle before it broke out of the shell. He immediately knew that this was the true consciousness of the treasure sensing its master's intention. Zhang Yan smiled, and then he withdrew the world leaf from his sleeve and said, "Then give it another try. If you're unable to make it to the tribulation, then it's the will of the heavens, and it can't be forced. However, if it's like that, then I won't use you again in the future." These words were not just words, but he was really prepared to do so. A word was a vow. If he couldn't refine a true treasure before the tribulation, then he would abandon it. The heaven and earth leaf was connected to his mind, so it immediately understood that if it missed this opportunity, it would never be able to transform again. The consciousness suddenly surged, and it was full of vigor. The treasured body of the leaf trembled slightly, and there were even halos emitting from it. Zhang Yan nodded and said, "Yes, that's right. I hope you can come out soon. At that time, you and I, master and servant, will work together to deal with the Great Tribulation." As he spoke, he pressed his hand and sent a stream of clear air into it.